Chapter 355. Connolly knew that a man would bring a woman to watch a horror movie. She rolled her eyes at Eric and asked, "Do you have Ghost? That's your latest movie. I heard that it's a good movie, but I haven't had the chance to go to the cinema recently. If you have, you can watch it." "Oh yes, I also heard that the song in the movie is very good." "Yes, I happened to bring a copy back," Eric said. He walked forward and quickly found a copy of Ghost. After installing it on the film projector, Eric turned off the lights in the screening hall and sat on the sofa with the woman in his arms. Because it was a special copy, there was no opening. The beginning of the movie was a long shot. Whether it was the picture or the soundtrack, it was the soundtrack of the original horror movie. It took more than a minute to create a suspenseful atmosphere. After seeing the opening, 99% of people would think that the whole story would take place in the old house. When the suspenseful atmosphere was created to the extreme, the wall was smashed with a bang. The sudden change in the atmosphere gave people a sense of relief, as if they had come from hell to earth. Eric did not make any changes to the opening of the movie. It had to be said that any movie that had created a box office miracle had its own special features. The opening of Ghost was particularly good at attracting the attention of the audience. Although when they found out that it was a tear-jerking romance movie, many horror movie fans complained that it was a waste of such a good opening. There was no doubt that it took only a minute to firmly capture the audience's attention. It was difficult for such a movie not to be a success. In the first few minutes, the plot was plain and uneventful. Most of the time, it was just a conversation between Sam, Molly, and Carl. However, from their words, one could tell the personalities of the three of them. Sam was an ambitious investment bank manager. Molly was a romantic artist. As for Carl, he was a bit of a businessman. When he saw the vast space behind the wall, the first thing that came to his mind was to sell it and make money. He also expressed undisguised envy for the roadside Lamborghini sports car. He said that one day, he would own such a luxury car. With just a few scenes, Carl's strong desire for money was outlined. This also paved the way for Carl to fall into madness for money. In Hollywood movies, there were often props and small details that hinted at the development of the plot. Many scenes that were originally thought to be useless, after watching, often found that the scene was hinting at something. Compared to Eric, who could not help but look at the movie with the eyes of a director, Jennifer Connelly, who was quietly leaning in the man's arms, focused most of her attention on Bridget Fonda. She could not help but bring herself into the role of Bridget Fonda, imagining what kind of effect she would have if she had acted in some scenes. After watching for nearly 10 minutes, she kept feeling that Bridget Fonda's performance did not seem to be anything special. If she had played Molly, perhaps she could have acted better. Thinking of this, Jennifer Connelly secretly glanced at Eric, who was focused on the screen. Compared to a year ago, she found that she could not understand the thoughts of the man beside her at all. Just like the female lead in Ghost. Why was he not willing to give her a try? The plot finally reached the climax of the first episode. In the Insomniac night, to the tune of "Oh My Love," the extremely beautiful scene and the passionate performances of the male and female leads finally brought Connelly into the movie. She felt less conflicted in her mind. After Sam discovered that some of the accounts were abnormal, he changed the passwords, which brought about his own death. Sam, who had turned into a spirit, did not go to heaven. Instead, he drifted in the mortal world, waiting by Molly's side in a daze. Compared to the original Patrick Swayze, Nicolas Cage's performance was much more delicate. He vividly portrayed Sam's hesitation, anxiety, and reluctance after he turned into a spirit. Whoopi Goldberg's appearance added a touch of warmth to this sad story. Not only was the constant chatter of black actors not annoying, but it also gave people a sense of reassurance. Later, Sam discovered the ins and outs of his murder. After a series of twists and turns, Sam finally proved to Molly that he was still alive. The moment the two hugged each other again, the Righteous Brothers singing seemed to have become heart-wrenching. Eric also saw the glistening tears at the corners of the eyes of the girl in his arms, and he tightened his grip on Connelly. After the movie ended, the girl leaned on Eric and whispered softly, "I really hope they don't end up together in the end." She no longer cared about the female lead's problem in her heart, and was instead immersed in a faint sadness. Eric was also moved by the movie's plot at this time. When he heard the girl's words, he said softly, "There will always be regrets. Only incomplete beauty can leave a deep impression on people." In the dim theater, the two were silent for a moment. Their eyes met, and soon they kissed. After a while, the two separated and their eyes met. Connolly suddenly smiled. "I feel like I'm back in reality again." "Welcome back," Eric said with a smile. Of course he knew what Connolly meant. "Do you want to watch it again?" Connolly shook his head. "No need, I've already memorized all the plot. I have to say, the movie you made is really good." "Thank you for the compliment," Eric said. He stood up and took down the film of Ghost from the projector. He looked at Connolly and said, "What should we watch next?" Connolly thought about it and said to Eric, "Let's go with The Kid in Charge." "The second one? I've watched the first one, and I feel that it's something for children to watch. I feel that the second one is more suitable for adults and children to watch together." Eric nodded. While looking for the film of Ghost in Charge 2, he said, "This sequel originally wanted to enter the adult market. In the future, the third and fourth one may be even more so." The morning sun shone into the bedroom. Eric woke up and looked at Connolly, who was curled up in his arms like a cat. Jennifer Connolly quickly woke up when she felt Eric's movements. "Good morning, baby." "Morning," the girl said lazily. She looked at Eric and said, "How about we get up? Let me hug you for a while," Eric said softly. Chapter 356. Seeing that Eric had no intention of letting go of him, Connolly nodded and did not say anything else. "It's getting late, look outside," Connolly said after a while, looking out of the window. Eric looked at his watch and remembered that he had to choose the female lead for Flashpoint today. As for the two male leads, Catherine Bigelow had already been decided. They were Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze. Keanu Reeves had already begun to prepare for his role by joining a Los Angeles police station to experience life. Looking at the girl in his arms, Eric quickly made a decision. He picked up the phone and dialed Catherine Bigelow's number. He casually found a reason to say that he would not be attending the audition for the female lead today, and would let Catherine Bigelow decide for herself. Of course, he was inevitably teased by Catherine Bigelow. The woman thought that her straightforward words yesterday made Eric too embarrassed and avoided her. After hanging up the phone, Eric said to Connolly, who had been listening, "Okay, there's nothing else today. We have the whole day." Connolly shrank his neck and asked, "You seem to be talking about the casting just now?" "Yes, I'm personally producing a movie called Flashpoint. It's a police and gangster movie. Although it tells the story of a few criminals and undercover agents who robbed British Airways, this movie is more about parkour and extreme sports. It will be very cool after it's produced. You can watch it in the future," Eric casually explained. Noticing the girl's expression, Eric quickly realized what she was thinking and explained, "The female lead of this movie is not suitable for you. Catherine Bigelow wants a wild character, and you don't have that temperament." Connolly was a little embarrassed that Eric saw through his thoughts, but he heard Eric continue, "There's a good opportunity tonight. Robert is organizing a celebration party for the box office success of Sleeping with the Enemy. There will be many Hollywood producers there. I'll help you ask if there are any suitable movies for you. I'm sure there are still many people in Hollywood who are willing to give me face. Actually, you don't have to be in such a hurry." The girl was a little reserved. Soon, she couldn't help but ask, "Do you have plans for your next movie?" "It's a story about tornado. We'll have to wait until the special effects problem is solved before we can start shooting. It's likely that we'll have to wait until next spring," Eric said casually. He didn't explain too much. The girl definitely wouldn't be as interested in his huge plan as Cameron. Eric had already given the role of the heroine of Tornado to Joanna Pacula. The actress was now having an oral class. Although she had been in the United States for so many years, Joanna's oral English was still not up to standard. Although Eric was inexplicably fond of the intonation of the actress when she said, "I am sorry," the heroine of Tornado was, after all, a native of the United States. If she spoke with a European immigrant's accent, it would be a joke. In addition, the filming of Tornado would have to wait until next spring at the earliest. In order to reduce the time that the huge amount of money would be spent on the project, the filming was postponed until next summer. This was the rule for many Hollywood movies. Tornadoes were frequent in spring and summer. If they chose to film in autumn and winter, it would be a test of the North American audience's IQ. With the current level of special effects, the outdoor scenes definitely couldn't be faked. Including the post-production special effects, the production cycle of Tornado would be as long as a year. It would be completed in 1991. As a popcorn movie, it would definitely be released in the summer of 1992. In this way, Eric's frequency of directing movies would return to the normal level of most directors 1 or 2 years. In these 2 years, Eric couldn't spend all his energy on Tornado. In the second half of the year, the Camerons' Terminator 2 and Thriller needed his personal attention. After these 2 projects were completed, the special effects problem of Tornado would definitely be solved. At that time, he would start preparing for Tornado. Of course, although special effects movies would become mainstream in the future, Eric's main energy would also be focused on the production of special effects movies. However, Eric wouldn't give up on short production cycles and high returns. However, he planned to learn from Spielberg's work model. He would personally direct a movie and act as a producer for many movies. Jennifer Connelly saw that Eric's mind began to wander after saying one sentence. She was slightly dissatisfied. "Eric, what are you thinking about?" Eric realized that he had neglected the beautiful woman in his arms. He said nothing. "Then let's get up." Connelly wanted to sit up, but she was pulled into Eric's arms again. "I just canceled today's work. You must have nothing to do, right?" Connelly smiled and said, "But, Eric, I'm hungry." Eric looked at the woman's expression and had no choice but to give up. He said, "Okay, what do you want to eat? Or we can go out to eat. There are many good restaurants in Malibu." "Aren't you afraid of being seen by others?" Jennifer Connelly asked with a smile. "Another one. You're really busy." That night, in the Hilton Hotel's banquet hall, this was the first sentence that Elizabeth said when she saw Eric. Eric looked at the back of the woman who was walking to the bathroom before turning to Elizabeth. "Of course. Especially when I hear someone complaining like a resentful wife, I feel quite accomplished." "Ha, resentful wife? Are you talking about me?" Elizabeth laughed as if she had heard the funniest joke in the world. Eric shrugged and said, "Everyone knows who it is. I'm just curious. Why do I seem to see you everywhere?" "This is the celebration party for Sleeping with the Enemy. I'm good friends with Julia. Isn't it reasonable for me to appear here?" Elizabeth explained clearly. "It seems quite reasonable, but it also feels weird." Eric said honestly, "Between the two of you, our business is none of your business." Elizabeth immediately interrupted Eric's speculation and said, "I just overheard you talking to Brooks about a movie." Eric had no intention of hiding anything. He said honestly, "Yes, I want to find a suitable female lead for Jenny." Elizabeth curled her lips and said, "How many people are you planning to harm this time?" Eric was baffled. "I don't understand what you're talking about." Chapter 357. The Polish actress who was always by your side a while ago. I think her name is Joanna Pakula, right? Elizabeth reminded him. Eric nodded. "And then, because of you, that woman received many offers from film companies. However, all the scripts that were handed to you through that woman's agent were rejected by you. You haven't forgotten about this, have you?" No. Eric seemed to understand something, but he wasn't sure. "I had other plans for Joanna, and there weren't any outstanding stories in those scripts. Did something happen after that?" "I heard about it by chance. The projects that passed through your hands were all axed." "All of them?" Eric asked in disbelief. Elizabeth nodded. She looked at Eric with a strange look in her eyes. "It shouldn't be wrong. You have to know that for standard film studios like the Big Seven, most film projects start from the moment the producer receives a script. It takes months or even years of twists and turns before the film company can officially start preparing for the project. In the end, because of a few words of yours, the project that they've been working on for so long instantly went up in smoke. You're not optimistic about it. So, How many people are you planning to harm by finding a role for your woman this time? Eric didn't answer Elizabeth's last question. Instead, he asked, has my impression of you changed that much? Elizabeth rolled her eyes and said helplessly, now a lot of people are attributing the box office success of The Silence of the Lambs to you. I think it's the same for Sleeping with the Enemy. Although I know that this project was single-handedly handled by Robert Shea, people who don't know the inside story definitely don't think so. Up until now, none of your movies have failed. Isn't that reason enough for people to be superstitious? Eric unconsciously scratched his cheek and muttered in a low voice, seems like it's a bit too much. What did you say? Elizabeth leaned closer and asked. I said your gown tonight is really beautiful. Eric looked up and replied. Elizabeth proudly raised her chin and said, do I need you to tell me that? This is Chanel's latest summer collection. Ah. Bah. That's not what you were talking about. Have fun, Eric said to Elizabeth casually when he saw Connolly walking in. Then he walked towards Connolly. Elizabeth glared at Eric indignantly. She flicked her short blonde hair and walked into the crowd. You're back. Follow me. I just saw Columbia's vice president, Amy Pascal. She must have a project for Columbia in the second half of the year. I'm quite familiar with her. Eric held Connolly's arm and walked towards Amy Pascal. The men and women standing beside Amy Pascal all stopped talking and looked at Eric. Among them, only Amy knew Eric. After approaching, Amy Pascal took the initiative to greet him. Hello, Eric. Amy, long time no see. This is my girlfriend, Jennifer Connolly. Eric shook Amy's hand and introduced her to Connery. Nice to meet you, Miss Connolly. You're really beautiful. I think I've seen your movies, Amy Pascal said to Connolly warmly. Connolly was inevitably a bit reserved when she heard Eric introduce her as the vice president of Columbia. However, she still shook hands with Amy Pascal generously and said, thank you. You're also very beautiful, Miss Pascal. Amy Pascal smiled and nodded. After exchanging pleasantries with Connolly, she turned her attention back to Eric. She took the initiative to introduce a few people around Eric. They were all executives of Hollywood film companies or famous producers. If it had been more than a year ago, Eric would have wanted to make friends with these people very much. But now, Eric didn't have to deliberately do this. The rise of Firefly was inevitable. Eric had no lack of funds and channels, so he became the target of many Hollywood producers. Of course, if he had a good movie project, he would first think of the Big Seven. However, Firefly's position in these people's hearts was not much lower than that of the Big Seven. It was even much higher than the declining MGM. They chatted for a while. Eric asked, Amy, do you have a movie project in your hands now? The kind that hasn't been decided yet? Amy Pascal keenly glanced at Connolly and smiled. Yes, but Eric, can you consider starting the sequel of Dark War? In that case, all the roles can be decided by you. Columbia will fully cooperate with you. Let's talk about this later. You should know that I'm too busy now. Eric shook his head. Because of last year's contract, the copyright of Dark War was shared by Columbia and Firefly. After the box office success of this version of Dark War, Columbia had been lobbying Eric to start the sequel of Dark War. However, Eric really had no interest in the sequel. After Columbia contacted Tom Hanks, Hanks also said that if Eric didn't participate in the production of the sequel, he wouldn't join either. This matter was delayed. Amy Pascal heard Eric's refusal and didn't mention it again. She was just casually saying it without any hope. Of course, if Eric suddenly agreed, the producer of this project in Columbia would definitely fall on her head. This would definitely be a great help to her career. Bypassing the topic of Dark War, Amy Pascal sized up Jennifer Connolly and said, I have a comedy in my hands. The female lead is very suitable for Miss Connolly. Tomorrow, I'll have someone send the script. Send it to Sharp Corner Manor. I'll see if the role is suitable for Jenny, Eric said. He didn't immediately agree. If the script wasn't good enough, Eric could also postpone it. This way he wouldn't owe her a favor. No problem, I'll have someone send the script tomorrow, Amy Pascal said with a smile. But Eric, even if you don't like it, you can't talk nonsense. Eric was stunned. He remembered what Elizabeth had just said to him. He laughed self-deprecatingly and shook his head. It seems that you all know about it. I actually just heard about it. But last time, I really didn't mean to. I didn't expect those scripts to all be cut. Chapter 358. The people around him laughed. The fat guy, who seemed to be a producer from Fox, said, Eric, I also have a few scripts. Why don't I send them to the Sharp Corner Manor tomorrow? Help me take a look. These projects are still under consideration. If you can pick one out, the female lead will be Miss Connolly. As soon as the fat guy finished speaking, the other people who were watching the show keenly realized that this was a very good opportunity. Although it was not easy to get Eric to write the script himself, it was very profitable to get Eric to help choose the script. All they had to do was pay the female lead. Eric, I'm here. Eric, tomorrow I'll get someone to. Realizing this, the executive producers around him immediately put down their reservations and took the initiative to recommend. How can you guys do this? Amy Pascal, who was pushed aside, complained helplessly. Noticing that a lot of people at the party were looking over curiously, Eric gestured to the people around him to keep quiet. The people in front of him were all smart people. They knew that if the news spread, they would not have much of a chance, so they tactfully shut their mouths. How about this? You can send the script over for me to take a look, but if you want me to help choose, I need to take 30% of the investment. Of course, I'll only invest and won't interfere with other things. The few people looked at each other and nodded at the same time. If Eric participated in the investment, this gimmick could be used for publicity in the future. As an investor, they definitely couldn't say anything if they gave him the role of an executive producer. Eric quickly saw through their thoughts and immediately said, I'll invest in Jenny's name. Let me say this first, the production of the movie has nothing to do with me. You can't use my name for publicity. After a brief hesitation, everyone quickly agreed. Eric was personally responsible for choosing the script and participating in the investment of the movie. He even let his woman be the female lead. This fully showed his affirmation of the movie. If they screwed up in the end, they could only blame themselves. After discussing this matter, Eric quickly probed. By the way, why did those scripts get cut last time? I don't believe it was because I said too much. Everyone looked at Jennifer Connelly in unison. The girl shrank her neck innocently, not understanding what had happened. Amy Pascal smiled and said, Eric, don't try to quibble. Although there are some other factors, those projects were cut because of you. Eric shrugged. All right, then what are the other factors you mentioned? Amy Pascal said, cut production. I don't know what the other film companies are planning, but Columbia has already decided to cut production. Pat, what about you? It's the same for our show, but it hasn't been confirmed yet. Mr. Ross thinks that the possibility of a fight is low. I think the possibility of a fight is very high. Eric interrupted. I'm sorry, everyone. Can you explain? Amy saw Eric's expression and said, Eric, if you pay attention to the recent international news, you should find that the situation in the Middle East is very tense. The federal government may use force against Iraq in the next year. If that's the case, the public's attention will definitely be focused on the war. The film companies will have to cut production. Eric was shocked. The Gulf War. He almost forgot about such an important time. Seeing Eric suddenly in a daze, Amy asked with concern, Eric, are you okay? In fact, the war might not necessarily start. After so many wars, the public's anti-war sentiment is still very high. Bush can't completely ignore the public's opinion and force a war. I'm fine. Sorry, excuse me. Eric forced a smile and pulled Jennifer Connelly, who was beside him. The two of them walked out of the crowd. Eric, what's wrong? Eric continued to walk out with the woman and said, Jenny, we have to go back. I suddenly remembered something very important. Jennifer Connelly nodded obediently. After she and Eric said goodbye to some people, the two quickly left the Hilton Hotel. Back at the Sharp Corner Manor, Eric told the woman to go to sleep. He then found the recent newspapers and went directly into the study. After spending an hour or two, he carefully read all the international news several times. Sure enough, during this time, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and other newspapers had a lot of news about the Middle East. Eric could roughly sort out the context. The matter was very simple. Iraq and Iran fought the Iran-Iraq War for 8 years until the second half of 1988. The result of the war was a lose-lose situation. At the same time, it caused Iraq to be in debt. It owed tens of billions of dollars in loans to countries in the Middle East. Iraq owed Kuwait $14 billion. It was impossible for Iraq to pay back this money. In the end, Iraq used the reason that their war with Iran was a contribution to the entire Arab world, and demanded that Kuwait cancel the debt. Kuwait, of course, did not agree. In the end, the two sides began to negotiate. Now that the negotiations had reached the final stage, the war between the two countries was almost imminent. Obviously, from the news in the newspaper, the United States had decided to intervene. Of course, it was impossible for the United States to not intervene. Iraq's attempt to persuade countries in the Middle East to reduce oil production and increase oil prices directly affected the interests of the United States. Of course, this was only what he knew now. According to the memories from his previous life, the negotiations finally broke down. Following that, Iraq invaded Kuwait. Saddam only took 8 hours to conquer the whole of Kuwait and declared Kuwait as Iraq's 19th province. It should have happened on August 2, 1990. There was only a little more than a month left. Half a year after Kuwait was occupied, on January 17, 1991, the Gulf War broke out. The United Nations, led by the United States, only took 42 days to conquer the whole of Kuwait. During the Gulf War in his previous life, Eric was already in junior high school. Although he was not as ignorant as a child, he was not as concerned about current affairs as he was when he was in university. Most of the information about the war was obtained after school. Occasionally, he would watch the news with the adults, or from other people's discussions. Therefore, this part of the memory was very fragmented. However, as long as he remembered a few key dates, it was enough. Although he was a butterfly in this dimension, he believed that with his current strength, he would not be able to affect the course of the war. Therefore, he could use his memory to obtain as much benefit as possible from the war. Chapter 359. Jennifer Connelly woke up very early. Looking at the empty side of the bed, the girl realized that Eric had not returned to the bedroom to sleep all night. This discovery made her a little disappointed. The two had sex the night before yesterday. According to common sense, the man should be very obsessed with her body during this time. However, Jennifer Connelly quickly found a reasonable reason to comfort herself. Judging from the way Eric left the party in a hurry last night, something important must have happened. Although she thought so, the girl was still a little absent-minded. After a simple wash, she did not even change her clothes and walked downstairs in her spaghetti-strap nightgown. After walking around the villa, she did not see Eric in the kitchen, the gym, or the terrace. The girl then remembered that Eric had walked into the study on the basement floor last night when he came back. It was the room with the most stringent security. The other rooms in the villa had ordinary door locks. Most of the time, they were not locked and could be entered by pushing the door. Only that room had the most advanced password lock. Even the door was a special alloy security door. Although she was curious about the contents of the room, Jennifer Connelly still knew her limits. Eric did not take the initiative to take her in, and she did not ask. Standing at the door of the study and hesitating for a while, Jennifer Connelly did not know if she should disturb Eric. Perhaps Eric had finished dealing with things last night and went straight to bed in the study. It was only 5 o'clock in the morning. People who were suddenly woken up after staying up late were very bad-tempered. However, Jennifer Connelly soon felt that with her waiting in the bedroom, the possibility of Eric sleeping in the study was very small. Although they had not been together for long, Jennifer Connelly had figured out some of Eric's little habits. For example, he liked to hug women when he slept. The night before, because she was not used to it, she escaped from Eric's arms several times. However, she was subconsciously pulled back by the sleeping man. What could there be in the study room? Could it be that he slept with a few big books? This idea made the girl feel a little funny and proud. She made up her mind to press the doorbell. "Jenny." Eric's voice came from the intercom next to the doorbell. There was a hint of tiredness in his plain voice. "It's me, Eric. I just wanted to see if you were inside." "Oh, it's already 5 o'clock. Eric's voice came from the walkie-talkie again. He then said, "Baby, can you prepare breakfast for me and send it over? I still have some things to deal with." Seeing that Eric didn't even open the door, the girl made a face at the walkie-talkie and said, "Okay, I'll go now." In the study, Eric once again looked at the several pages of dense text on the manuscript in front of him. This was the memory of the Gulf War that he had racked his brains to search for last night. If this data was leaked out and proved to be written at the end of June 1990 instead of some fake charlatans, it would definitely cause a great uproar in the future. Therefore, these things shouldn't have been written down. The reason why they appeared on the paper was because Eric needed a clear context. The memories of the Gulf War in his previous life were quite fragmented. Eric could only list out a timetable, and then think of all the bits and pieces of the Gulf War that he had heard about in his 40 years of life in his previous life. To be as safe as possible, Eric deliberately wrote it in Chinese. Even the data was in Chinese characters, and didn't use any Arabic numerals. The human brain didn't have a search engine like the internet. Although the memories of his previous life were imprinted in his mind like a hard drive, it was still a very messy hard drive with a lot of information. Even if the data was categorized and stored in different partitions in the real world, if there was too much data, it would be quite troublesome to find a file. It was even more difficult to find information about the Gulf War that he didn't care too much about from the sea of memories of his previous life. Because of the excessive use of his brain to search for information, Eric still felt a little dizzy. If he didn't realize that this was a great opportunity for him, the strong excitement offset most of the fatigue. Eric reckoned that he would have already fainted. After looking at the organized information again, Eric put the thin pages into a file and stuffed them into the safe in the study. He didn't plan to take these pages out of the study. The organized information was already in his mind. As long as he occasionally took it out and looked at it, Eric was sure that he wouldn't forget it. When the matter was over, he would immediately destroy these things. After changing a new password for the safe and locking it, Eric relaxed and stretched his body before returning to the study table. In addition to a large pile of newspapers, there were several open books on the table: Basic Futures Knowledge, Introduction to Oil Futures, and a Financial Terminology Handbook. He had asked someone to buy them overnight, and delivered them to the villa at 1 o'clock in the morning yesterday. Regarding this war, the biggest opportunity was, of course, the oil futures. In his memory, after Iraq invaded Kuwait, the price of crude oil in the international market soared from around $20 to $40 in just 2 months. Of course, Eric didn't want to rely on these introductory books to play the oil futures market. Professional things had to be done by professionals. Reading these books was just to know what professionals were doing when they did something, so that he could appropriately point them in the right direction. Eric then picked up some newspapers that contained important information, and put them into a briefcase. These were the reasons for his inference about the war in Kuwait. It was much better to have such a cover than to say it out loud and be misunderstood as a hothead. After tidying up the desk, Eric sat down again and picked up the Financial Terminology Handbook to read. After only a few minutes, a bunch of unfamiliar words in the handbook made Eric feel a sense of confusion. At the same time, he also understood why there were so many Westerners with dyslexia: Tom Cruise, Steven Spielberg, Jennifer Aniston, Marlon Brando, Keira Knightley, Whoopi Goldberg. For the Chinese futures terms, which belonged to hieroglyphics, people could roughly guess the meaning based on the surface meaning of the words open, close, long, and short. But for the English words, which were a long string of letters, there was no basis for people to guess. They could only be confirmed by a thick dictionary or a glossary. Chapter 360. Jennifer Connelly rang the doorbell again with breakfast in her hands. This time, the door opened directly. The woman looked inside curiously before walking in. She walked up the spiral staircase to the study. Looking at the drafts on the wall, she was as surprised as many people who walked into this study for the first time. "Eric, where is the breakfast?" The woman looked around and asked. Eric got up and walked to the sofa in the corner. He pointed to the coffee table next to him and took a sip of milk. Only then did Eric notice that Jennifer Connelly was just sitting next to him. She was looking at him with her right hand on her knee and her chin on her hand. "Jenny, have you eaten?" The woman shook her head and said with a smile, "I'll just have an apple later." Eric just nodded and didn't say anything else. Women definitely didn't listen to advice in this regard. It was often harder to get a woman to stop losing weight than to get her real money. "Eric, didn't you sleep last night?" After a while, Jennifer Connelly couldn't help but ask when she saw that Eric was eating with relish and seemed to be in a good mood. Eric swallowed the food in his mouth and said, "I took care of some things. By the way, I may be going to New York for a few days. Amy Pascal and the others should be sending the script that we discussed last night. You can just wait at the manor." Jennifer Connelly moved her body closer and looked at Eric expectantly. "It'll be too boring if I stay here alone. I want to go to New York with you." Eric shook his head and said seriously, "I have something important to do this time. I won't be able to accompany you if you go with me. It'll definitely be more boring than staying at home alone. How about this? After I'm done with this, I'll take you to New York to play when I'm free." Jennifer Connelly tugged at the corner of Eric's t-shirt to express her dissatisfaction. After a while, seeing that Eric had no intention of relenting, she reluctantly gave up. After eating breakfast, Eric finally felt a bit sleepy. He got up and helped the waitress clean up the tableware. Eric looked at the time. It was only 6:30. After calculating for a bit, he decided to rest for a few hours. Having lived 2 lives, Eric was very clear that his body was the most important thing. "I'm going to take a nap. Wake me up at 10. Jennifer Connelly, who was about to go jogging in the manor, gave him a meaningful look. "Do you need a pillow?" Eric was stunned for a moment before he quickly understood. He looked at the girl who had just changed into a tight sports singlet and shorts and said with interest, "Sure." Jennifer Connelly opened her arms and winked at Eric. "Then I'll do it myself." Eric didn't say anything else. He went up and picked Jennifer Connelly up. Amidst the girl's crisp laughter, he walked upstairs. The girl didn't hear the alarm clock. When she woke up, it was already 11 o'clock. She hurriedly put on her clothes and went downstairs. She quickly found Eric's figure. The man was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window by the sea, holding a cordless phone in his hand and walking back and forth. Only when she got closer did she hear the content of Eric's words. "I'm not on the blacklist. I'm at home right now. I'll give you the account in the afternoon or evening. It should be the account of Firefly Investment Company. I told you about this company before, the one that owns Cisco shares. Don't worry, it'll only take a month, I promise. That's all. I still have a few calls to make. I'll hang up first." Eric hung up the phone. Just as the girl was about to go over, she saw Eric quickly dial another number. "Hello, Stan? I'm Eric. I've been good recently. You. Here's the thing, I have something to tell you. Doesn't the digital domain account still have some money? I have something very important to do recently, so I want to borrow it temporarily. Don't worry, in 3 months at most, I'll transfer all the money back to the digital domain account. Don't you believe me?" Okay, I know, okay, but don't keep too much. I really have something very important to do. So that's all. You can ask the accountant at Digital Domain to calculate the financial situation first. I'll send the account to you then. So that's all, goodbye. Oh, I'll go over when I have time, but I've been really busy recently. Goodbye. After that, Connelly heard something similar again. Although she wasn't quite sure what was going on, Jennifer Connelly understood that Eric was probably withdrawing funds from a company called Digital Domain. After a few more similar calls, Eric put the cordless phone back in the card slot. Seeing Jennifer Connelly standing nearby, Eric walked up to her, hugged her waist and kissed her. Then he said without stopping for a moment, "Jenny, I'm going to Firefly's headquarters now. I might go directly to New York after that. You can stay here for the next few days." After that, Eric picked up a small suitcase on the side. Jennifer Connelly stepped forward to help the man carry another small satchel, and followed Eric out of the villa. A black MPV was already parked outside. The driver came over to take Eric's suitcase and put it in the trunk. Eric was about to get into the car when he quickly remembered something. He took out a credit card from his wallet and handed it to Connolly. If you're tired of staying in the manor, you can go shopping and buy anything. You don't have a place to stay in Los Angeles, right? Go pick a villa yourself. Hollywood Hills, Beverly Hills, or Malibu will do. Use this card to pay. I'm leaving. Goodbye. She felt Eric stuff the card into her hand and kiss her on the cheek. Then he got into the black MPV and drove away. It took Connolly a while to react. She remembered what Eric said just now. The woman looked at the Citibank credit card in her hand and thought for a while to confirm that she didn't hear wrongly. What? All the liquid funds? Eric, you can't do that. In the conference room, after hearing Eric's words, Robert Shea was the first to stand up and object. Eric, although we don't have any more movies to release during the summer break other than Ghost, the overseas distribution of Sleeping with the Enemy and Ghost will require money. Oh right, there's also the promotional video for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, as well as the production plan for the second half of the year. Eric knew that compared to the other companies that were completely under his control, Firefly was definitely not a matter that could be settled over the phone. However, he didn't intend to argue with Robert Shea for too long. Therefore, he quickly interrupted Robert Shea. Robert, I'm not going to take away all the funds. I think I've made it very clear just now. I only need to use this money for a month. After about a month, I'll slowly make up for it. Also, I'm not negotiating with you. Do you understand? Chapter 361. In the face of Eric's sudden aggression, Robert Shea's expression turned ugly, but his imposing manner also weakened a little. Unwilling to give up, he asked, Eric, can you at least tell me what you're going to do with the money? Eric shook his head without hesitation. Sorry, Robert, I can't say. The muscles on Robert Shea's face twitched a few times in anger, and he quickly said, Eric, if you insist on doing this, I think my next movie may need external investment. No problem. Eric readily agreed. Robert Shea had the same idea as when he set up Black Ant Films. He wanted to use Firefly's distribution channel to earn more profits. The so-called external investment was most likely just Robert Shea's personal investment. It seemed that the box office success of Sleeping with the Enemy had made Robert Shea even more arrogant. However, this was also good. Anyway, Eric had already made up his mind to kick Robert Shea out at the end of the year. Even if he used Firefly's distribution channel, it would only be this time. Moreover, whether or not he could make money was another matter. Hearing Eric agree so readily, Robert Shea hesitated. He quickly added, Of course, Firefly will still participate in part of the investment. I won't let our company suffer too much. Eric sneered in his heart. Robert Shea still had some self-awareness left. Although he said that he wouldn't let the company suffer, it was more because he didn't want the movie to be completely separated from him. This way, for his own benefit, he couldn't ignore the movie. If the movie sold well, all the credit would belong to Robert. If it failed, Robert Shea could also find an excuse to deal with it. However, Eric nodded again. That works too. That's it then. I'll go to work first. Robert Shea looked meaningfully at Firefly's CFO, Carolyn Elliott, who had been waiting by the side. He got up and left the conference room. Eric, are you really going to take all the company's money? Only the two of them were left in the conference room. Carolyn Elliott pushed the glasses on the bridge of her nose and asked with uncertainty. Eric nodded and asked, How much money do we have in the company's account now? Carolyn Elliott handed over the folder in her hand. A total of US $149. 5 million. Eric opened the folder and muttered, Why is it so little? Carolyn Elliott rolled her eyes. How was this little? Even the Big Seven might not have such a huge cash flow. Eric, it's already a lot. This is because the company's share of the US $75 million box office sales at the beginning of the month. Otherwise, the company's account would only have about US $70 million. Although the end of last year's had a few movies, US $150 million in taxes in April. Ants. With the money, the company's is The X-Files, and Who Will to Be a Millionaire? X. Eric quickly flipped through the detailed income and expenditure report. Only then did he understand that Carolyn Elliott was telling the truth. Firefly was in a period of rapid development. Like many companies in this period, they consumed a lot of money. If it weren't for the box office sales of Eric's movies providing enough money for Firefly, Firefly would have inevitably embarked on the path of external financing. How about this? Leave US $9.5 million in liquid funds. When I get the news, I'll transfer the rest to the designated account, Eric said as he closed the report. Carolyn Elliott hesitated. Eric, US $9.5 million is definitely not enough. The second season of Friends is already in production. According to the cost of producing 8 episodes per month, each episode costs US $1 million. That's $8 million. Not to mention, the company still needs other expenses. After the success of the first season, the cost of the second season of Friends had also skyrocketed. The cost of each episode had reached US $1 million. Thinking of the sweet face that he hadn't seen for a long time, Eric showed a brief hesitation, but he quickly said, "It's only a month, Carolyn. Besides, it's impossible that we don't have any income this month. Aren't the videotapes of the movies on the market at the end of the year? Also, you can negotiate with Fox to see if you can get some of the advertising revenue from Who Will Be a Millionaire in advance. If there's no other way, then we can suspend production." Carolyn Elliott couldn't help but push up the glasses on her nose bridge again. She frowned slightly and wanted to say something, but when she saw Eric's expression, she swallowed the words that she wanted to say. After finalizing the funding matter, Eric quickly boarded the flight to New York. The headquarters of Firefly Investment Company was located in a building in the business center of Manhattan. The company's main asset was 23% of Cisco's shares. In addition, Chris was also responsible for Eric's private wealth management work. Although he had received a call before, when Eric arrived in New York, it was not yet noon, which surprised Chris Hansen a little. The two of them went to the office together. Eric took out the newspapers that he had sorted out last night and pushed them in front of Chris. He briefly explained his thoughts. Chris listened to Eric's analysis. Although it was a little amateur, it was to the point. He nodded from time to time. When Eric finished, he said, "Eric, during this period, because of the situation in the Middle East, crude oil futures have indeed continued to rise. If you are interested, you can invest US $10 million to play with it." "Chris, do you think I flew to New York in such a hurry just to play?" Chris looked at Eric and couldn't help but sit up straight. He had a bad feeling in his heart. Eric pressed his arm on the table and leaned forward slightly. He stared at Chris and said seriously, "Chris, before I came, I have already contacted all the liquid funds in Firefly, Pixar, and Digital Domain. The specific data is still being calculated. I estimate it to be around US $200 million. In the next month, I will continue to raise funds with all my strength." "So?" Chris asked in an uncertain tone. "I want to bet big," Eric replied. "US $200 million, all long crude oil futures." "Eric, I think you need to calm down. Have you been bewitched by someone?" Chris reached out and found a copy of the newspaper that Eric handed over. He pointed to a data article in the financial section and said, "You see, in the past 3 months, crude oil prices have risen from US $14 to US $18 per barrel. Most statistical agencies expect that even if the situation in the Middle East falls into a stalemate again, crude oil prices will not exceed US $20 per barrel. If you entered the market 3 months ago, you would have made a lot of money, but no one can predict the future. Now that oil prices have reached US $18, it will definitely fluctuate between US $18 and US $20. The risk of entering the market is very high." "What if the Middle East goes to war?" Eric asked. Chris remembered what Eric said when he first came and realized that Eric had been hinting at the possibility of another war in the Middle East through the information in the newspapers in front of him. "That's even more impossible." "Eric, who will fight who?" Chris asked. "The military strength of the Arab countries in the Middle East is generally not high. Take Saudi Arabia for example. It has millions of square kilometers of land and only 70,000 soldiers. Small countries like Kuwait, the UAE, and Qatar are almost non-existent. And Iraq, the country most likely to start a war, has just been fighting with Iran for 8 years. Its domestic economy is about to collapse. Saddam is not a fool. Don't think that he is showing off to small countries like Kuwait and the UAE, and even slandering Kuwait for stealing Iraq's oil. At most, he is extorting some benefits like before. Of course, Saddam is not a fool, but he is crazy. Chris, think about it. If Iraq invades Kuwait, what will happen? Chapter 362. Of course it's the skyrocketing international oil prices, Chris replied without hesitation. That's your final guess, Eric, but it's impossible. Do you know what it means for Iraq to invade Kuwait? The proven oil reserves of these two countries accounted for 1/5 of the world's known oil reserves. Once Iraq annexed Kuwait, Saddam Hussein would be able to manipulate the international oil price at will, which would be tantamount to pushing himself to the position of public enemy, and the whole world would not agree. Even if he's crazy, he won't do that. Since everyone thinks so, I want to take a gamble. I bet that war will break out in the Middle East within 3 months. Chris, if you don't want to help me, I'll just take the money and open an account at the New York Mercantile Exchange. You won't watch a layman like me get cheated, right? In the end, Eric played the emotional card. Chris listened to Eric's shameless tone and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Eric, your net worth is now at the level of $1 billion. You can already buy everything you want. Is it necessary to take such a risk? You just said that you're going to withdraw the liquidity of all your companies. Once you lose all this money, it will be a big problem. The incident at the beginning of the year just happened. If the 7 major film companies know that Firefly's liquidity has dried up, they will definitely not hesitate to add insult to injury again. The business world is very cruel. Don't expect others to be merciful, Eric said confidently. Why don't you think in a positive direction? What if I'm right? Chris smiled and played with a pen in his hand. He softly advised, Eric, why don't you calm down for a few days, play in New York, or go on a vacation? Chris, I'm very calm. I've already decided. If you don't agree, I'll go to a futures brokerage company and do it myself. Eric pretended to get up. Chris saw that Eric was not pretending, so he helplessly waved his hand and said, Okay, I promise you. Sit down first. The two of them discussed some details, and Chris called the company's finance manager over. Eric, go through the transfer procedures with Webb first. I'll find you guys later. After Eric left with the company's finance manager, Chris picked up the phone in front of him and dialed Jeffrey's number. Dad, did Eric tell you about him? After a few words, Chris said, It seems that Eric didn't tell you about this, but it's hard to explain it over the phone. I think you should come to New York. Eric, he's a little hot-headed, and I can't persuade him. After a few hurried words, Chris quickly hung up and walked out of the office. Eliza Brighton couldn't help but look at the 3 people sitting in the living room again. This was Eric's second day in New York. After finishing the filming of Basic Instinct, Jeffrey went back to the farm he bought in Maryland to rest for a while. In less than a week, the old man rushed to New York because of a phone call from his son. At this time, the 3 of them were silent. Jeffrey had been persuading Eric for an hour, but Eric still had no intention of relenting. Chris saw that the situation was a little awkward, so he suddenly said to his girlfriend in the kitchen, Ellie, is dinner ready? Yes, it's ready, Eliza quickly replied. Why don't we eat first? Chris asked tentatively. Eric didn't want to argue with Jeffrey, so he said with a smile, Jeffrey, let's eat first. After dinner, you can continue persuading him. Don't starve yourself. The old man snorted with a sour face, then he got up and walked to the dining room. Eric shrugged at Chris, and Chris sighed helplessly. Eliza Brighton was a very talkative girl. If it was any other time, she would have found a topic or two to stir up the atmosphere at the table. However, at this time, the girl sat quietly beside Chris, eating dinner without saying a word. After eating dinner in silence for a while, Jeffrey finally said in a gentle tone, Eric, this matter can't be kept a secret. If you want to speculate in oil futures, sure, but you can't invest all your money in it, and you can't speculate with loans. If others know that you lost all your money, they will definitely take the opportunity to strangle you. Jeffrey, why can't you think positively? What if you make a profit? How can there be such a good thing? This is Wall Street, not Hollywood. We are all amateurs. Chris interrupted at the right time. Yeah, Eric, Wall Street is the territory of the financial giants. Futures is actually a two-way bet contract. If you make money, it means that other people lose money. The more you make, the more other people lose money. Do you think your opponents will be willing to accept this? When I worked at Morgan Stanley, I saw with my own eyes the behavior of these big investment banks manipulating the financial market for their own interests. Not to mention the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission. Even the FBI can't do anything to these giants. We have a small bet of $200 million. Those big investment banks don't have to target us, right? Eric shrugged and said casually. What's more, once a war broke out in the Middle East, the price of crude oil would soar. Under this general trend, any tricks of the financial giants would only be washed away by the big waves. Jeffrey and his father looked at each other and fell silent again. Eric didn't want to continue to dwell on this issue. He looked at Eliza Brighton, who was sitting next to Chris. He remembered that last Thanksgiving, this couple was still at loggerheads. Now it seemed that they had reconciled. Ellie, is your family's clothing company listed? I remember you talking about this last Thanksgiving. Eliza looked at her boyfriend next to her with hidden bitterness and shook her head. It won't happen in 3 years. It's okay. When we make money this time, if you are willing, I can invest, Eric said with a smile. Eliza smiled and agreed. She didn't take it seriously. After spending a long time with Chris, the girl also knew how risky the futures market was. For an investor like Eric to invest a lot of money, it would be good if he could take it back in one piece. The possibility of making money was next to nothing. Eric, where are you staying now? Jeffrey asked again. I booked a suite at the 60 Soho Hotel on 6th Avenue. I plan to stay there for the time being. Jeffrey didn't know the location of 6th Avenue. He looked at his son and explained, 6th Avenue is very close to the New York Mercantile Exchange. Jeffrey sighed. Eric even considered this detail. It seemed that there was no room for negotiation. Chris, put aside the investment company for the time being, and focus on helping Eric. Try your best. I understand, Dad, Chris nodded. Over the next few days, Chris began to help Eric hire traders and open accounts. Jeffrey also followed the two young men all day. Of course, there was no lack of arguments during this period. It was mainly about the proportion of futures margin. Eric wanted the margin to be 5%, which was 20 times leverage. This way, the $200 million fund could be enlarged to $4 billion. However, Chris and Jeffrey agreed that the margin should be 5 times leverage and 20%. Eric knew that the father and son were thinking for him, so he didn't insist. After arguing for the whole morning, both sides took a step back and agreed to 10% margin and 10 times leverage. It was July, and the price of crude oil in the futures market rose again. It was already close to $19 per barrel. Eric and Chris hurriedly formed a futures trading team and began to enter the market. Because of the situation in the Middle East, a large number of speculators invested in the crude oil futures market. The daily trading volume of crude oil futures on the New York Mercantile Exchange alone had exceeded 100,000 lots, 1,000 barrels per lot on the New York Mercantile Exchange. The daily trading volume reached $2 billion. With the current situation in the Middle East, many people were betting. Some hoped that the price of crude oil would fall back to $14 a few months ago. Of course, there were also people who believed that the price of crude oil would continue to rise. Therefore, Eric's team was not too eye-catching. However, in order not to attract too much attention, Chris controlled the daily trading volume to about $10 million. According to this progress, it was enough to spend all the $200 million fund before August. Eric didn't raise any objections. As Chris said before, after the price of crude oil rose to $19, it no longer rose sharply. Instead, it began to fluctuate between $18 and $20. Jeffrey was more worried than the two young people every day. Although the delivery date of the futures contract Eric bought was after October, the profit and loss of the futures trading was calculated daily. After the close of every day, Jeffrey would take a calculator and calculate how much he earned and how much he lost. Worried that the old man would have a heart attack, Eric and Chris persuaded Jeffrey more than once to go back to the Maryland farm. However, all kinds of methods were used to no avail. After another busy day, Eric returned to the hotel where he lived. After taking a shower, he was planning to make a few phone calls back to Los Angeles when he heard the doorbell ring. Although many people knew that he was in New York, not many people knew the address of the hotel where he lived. Eric curiously opened the door. A petite figure directly jumped up and threw herself on Eric's body, coiling around his waist like a koala. This situation was really immoral. Eric quickly returned to the room and closed the door. Only then did he pull Drew off his body and asked, "Didn't you go to Hawaii for a vacation? I remember you said that you wouldn't be back for a few weeks. Why did you suddenly come here?" The girl let Eric throw her on the sofa. Lying there, she supported her round little chin and looked at Eric with sparkling eyes. She laughed and said, "Jeffrey said that you are crazy. He asked me to persuade you to go back to Los Angeles for treatment." Chapter 363. Eric pinched the girl's tender face and said, "You seem very happy to hear that I'm crazy?" "Yeah." Drew nodded and grabbed Eric's hand. She opened her small mouth and bit it a few times before letting go. She watched as Eric turned around to get the cordless phone. She was very happy. Of course she was happy. Since Jeffrey called to inform her, she had been in this state of excitement. She directly ditched her mother who was still in Hawaii and flew back to New York alone. Because Eric didn't listen to advice and stubbornly bet on futures, Jeffrey thought that she was the only person who could persuade Eric. This meant that she was the closest person to Eric. How could this make the girl unhappy? As for trading in futures, so be it. She didn't care if it was all lost. As long as Eric was happy, it was fine. In Drew's eyes, Eric was everything. Nothing else was important. Eric took the cordless phone and sat down on the sofa. The girl clung to him again and waved her small arms in front of his eyes. She showed off and said, "Eric, do you think my tan skin is beautiful?" "It's not beautiful. I still like white and tender skin." Eric casually glanced and said, "Ah, why didn't you say so earlier? If I had known, I wouldn't have tanned." The girl sat up unhappily and rubbed her arms that were tanned to a honey-colored color. It was as if she wanted to whiten her skin. "Well, it's actually very beautiful," Eric said casually as he pushed the girl away insincerely. Drew pouted unhappily. She got up and walked to the bathroom, swaying her small waist. "I'm going to take a shower." Eric waved his hand to let the girl do as she pleased. The cordless phone in his hand was connected, and Eric turned his attention to the receiver. Although he had been in New York, Los Angeles was his home base. Eric would call every day to pay attention to what was going on there, mainly about the upcoming release of Ghost and Basic Instinct. For this trip to New York, Eric deliberately left his assistant Alan Fissman in Los Angeles and only brought a group of bodyguards with him. After half an hour, Eric put down the phone. Everything was normal at Firefly. However, Eric had to go back tomorrow because he had to appear at the premiere of Ghost in Los Angeles the night after tomorrow. Compared to the previous two movies, The Silence of the Lambs and Basic Instinct, the timing of the release of Ghost was not very good. The week before, Tom Cruise's Thunderbolt Aspirations was released. The movie's prospects were not very good. So far, the box office for the first week was only $20 million. For a big production with a cost of more than $60 million, this result was definitely a failure. However, it would definitely have an impact on the box office of Ghost the next week. And the biggest impact on the box office of Ghost was Die Hard 2, which was released at the same time on July 6th. Die Hard 2 was scheduled to be released after Ghost. For this reason, Eric personally called Barry Diller and Murdoch. Michael Eisner also communicated with Fox. Unfortunately, neither side was satisfied with the other. In the end, they decided to work together. Eric was full of confidence in Ghost, and now it seemed that Fox was also full of confidence in Die Hard 2. After the call, Eric turned on the TV to watch the news for a while. The bathroom door opened, and the girl with a big towel around her waist floated out. Facing Eric's helpless expression, the girl was quite self-righteous. "There's no bathrobe in the bathroom." "Where's your luggage?" The girl pointed to the small satchel on the sofa that she had brought with her. "There." Eric looked in the satchel. There were only passports and a few girls' belongings in the satchel. He helplessly got up and said, "Forget it, wear my t-shirt first. I'll call someone to buy you clothes." "Okay." Drew followed Eric into the bedroom. "You're as tanned as a little girl. Don't show off, put it on." Eric threw a t-shirt at the girl and joked. "You're being racist, I protest." Drew unhappily took the t-shirt and put it on. Seeing Eric walk out of the bedroom, the girl quickly caught up and said, "It'll turn white soon." The next day, when Jeffrey saw Drew and Eric show up at the New York business firm together, he was disappointed to see that the little girl didn't do anything to stop them. The old man completely gave up the idea of persuading them. Besides, in less than a week, Eric had already invested 50 million yuan into the crude oil futures market. It was too late to do anything now. He could only pray to God that Eric wouldn't lose too much money. After discussing with Chris in the morning, Eric took a flight back to Los Angeles in the afternoon. Drew had just taken a 12-hour flight from Hawaii to New York the day before. She was still jet-lagged, so she did not come back. It was already 9 o'clock in the evening of July 4th when he returned to Los Angeles. The premiere of Ghost would be held on the evening of July 5th. Eric was not in a hurry to go to Firefly. After getting off the plane at the Los Angeles International Airport in Santa Monica, he called the people he needed to inform, and went straight back to the Sharp Corner Manor. When he walked into the villa, only a few yellow wall lamps were on in the hall. However, the small living room on the east side of the hall was lit with fluorescent lights. Eric put down his luggage and walked over. The sound of the TV came from the small living room. He opened the door and looked inside. Jennifer Connelly seemed to have just taken a shower. Her hair was still wet. She was wrapped in a simple bathrobe and lying on the sofa watching the TV. She looked like a lazy and delicate Persian cat. Hearing the sound, the girl turned her head in confusion. When she saw Eric, she immediately got up from the sofa and rushed over with a happy expression. "Eric, you're back." Eric hugged the girl. "Yeah, what are you watching?" Jennifer Connelly affectionately held Eric's arm and walked to the sofa. She sat down and said, "Nothing, just killing time. I was going to sleep anyway." Eric looked at the TV and could not tell what TV series Connelly was watching. He said, "If you're bored, you can ask a few friends to come over and play." "I don't have many friends in Los Angeles," Connelly said disappointedly. Then she remembered something and got up. "By the way, Eric, they send a lot of scripts these days," Connelly said as she walked out. After a while, she returned to the small living room with a huge stack of scripts that was 30 centimeters thick. Eric was surprised and helped the girl put them on the coffee table. It seemed that these were all complete scripts. There were at least 40 to 50 of them. Chapter 364. Why are there so many? I remember there were only 5 or 6 people around when I talked about this. Jennifer Connelly's expression was filled with unconcealable excitement. In the past, she had to put in a lot of effort just to be the female lead in a small production. Now, she had a bunch of scripts delivered to her door just by staying at home. This kind of treatment made her feel a little smug. Of course, Connelly did not forget who had given her all this. She leaned on Eric affectionately and said, "I'm not too sure either. Maybe the news was accidentally leaked. In the past few days when you were gone, there were people delivering scripts every day. Some of them were even delivered to Jim. Jim was shocked and thought that someone had delivered the wrong script. He only found out the reason when he called to ask, so he sent them all over." Eric picked up a script and flipped through it casually. He thought of the girl's manager, Jim Rester, and asked, "Did Jim give you any suggestions?" Connelly shook her head. "Jim can't afford to offend the people who delivered the scripts to him, so he brought them all over for you to decide." Eric smiled and said, "That's good too. From the films you picked for you before, Jim's taste isn't very good either. Actually, he's not bad. It's just that we didn't have much choice in the past. After all, Jim Rester had helped her manage her career for so many years. Connolly weakly spoke up for him. Eric did not respond. He flipped through the information of a few people who delivered the scripts and casually threw them on the coffee table. He sneered and said, "They all have a good plan. How can there be so many good things in this world?" These film companies obviously wanted him to pick a suitable script, then produce it and use his fame to make money. In the end, they could even drag him into it. Connolly could feel the displeasure emanating from the man. She shrunk her neck and looked at the pile of scripts worriedly. She was afraid that Eric would reject them in a fit of anger. In the past few days when Eric was away, the girl had taken a liking to a few of the scripts, and had even discussed it with Jim Rester in private. However, Connolly also knew that although these people were nominally inviting her to be the female lead, they were actually targeting Eric. She did not have any say in it. "It's too late. Let's talk about it tomorrow." Eric stood up and said to Connolly, "Baby, I'm going to take a shower first. Can you prepare a cup of warm milk for me?" "Sure." Connolly nodded and watched Eric leave the small living room. The girl turned off the TV and cleaned up the small living room. She looked at the pile of scripts reluctantly before she turned off the lights and walked through the hall to the kitchen on the west side. The woman took out a glass from the cupboard and poured pure milk into it. Then, she placed the glass of milk into another large measuring cup and slowly poured boiling water into it. She patiently waited for the milk cow to be heated by the boiling water. The reason why he didn't choose to heat the milk directly was mainly because too high of a temperature would destroy the nutrition of the milk. If he heated the milk with boiling water, not only would the nutrition of the milk not be destroyed after heating, but the temperature was just right. He could drink it without waiting. A few minutes later, Connolly carefully took the milk out of the measuring cup and tasted it to test the temperature. Only then was he satisfied and walked out of the kitchen to the bedroom upstairs. Because Eric had always wanted to be a movie director in his previous life, he didn't know how many movies he had watched and how many notes he had taken. However, it was obvious that even if he added up all the movies in his memory, it would still not be comparable to the number of movies produced in Hollywood in a year. After breakfast the next day, Eric started to look through the pile of scripts for Connolly. He read more than 10 scripts in a row, but he didn't find any familiar movies in his memory. Of course, there were quite a few scripts that looked quite good. Those who had heard the news and sent the scripts over in hopes of collaborating would not be so stupid as to randomly send over low-quality scripts. The scripts that could be sent to the Sharp Corner Manor must have been carefully selected. Even if they had not started preparing for the project, they must have been considered with high priority. Judging from the themes of the scripts they received, these film companies must have done a detailed investigation of Connolly's information before sending them over. They must have known the girl's capabilities very well. Therefore, in these projects, none of the female leads played a leading role. More than 80% of the roles were just for show. The only difference was the number of scenes they had. Connolly complained a little about this, but Eric just laughed it off. Even he himself only regarded Connolly as a beautiful vase. No matter how eager the producers were, they would definitely not use a vase as an actress with good acting skills. Stop complaining. If you can be as good as Marilyn Monroe as a vase, your status will definitely be higher than those Oscar winners, Eric said to the depressed Connolly as he closed the stack of scripts and put them aside. He took out another script from the pile of papers in front of him and opened it. "It's not that easy, Marilyn Monroe," Connolly, who was curled up in the space chair opposite Eric, said in a tone full of yearning. Because of her legendary life experience, Marilyn Monroe was still talked about enthusiastically. Actresses who were at the same time as her, or even more famous than her, were often forgotten. Although many of them were still alive, none of them could be mentioned by everyone like Marilyn Monroe. As they were talking, the walkie-talkie nearby beeped. "Go to the gate and ask what's going on." Eric looked up and ordered. The girl put down the script in her hand, got up, and walked over. After saying a few words, she turned to Eric with a little surprise and said, "The guard said that Rupert Murdoch is here? What is this old fox doing here?" Eric muttered, but he could only stand up and walk over personally to ask the guard to let Murdoch in. Although Eric didn't like Murdoch, he still went out to greet him personally. Connolly hesitated and didn't follow. She knew Rupert Murdoch, and she was still a little afraid of a media tycoon like Murdoch. As soon as Eric walked out of the villa, a black Rolls-Royce drove over and stopped in front of the open space outside the villa. The driver quickly got out of the car and opened the back door. Murdoch walked out with a smile. Eric was about to greet him when the other side of the door opened by itself. Elizabeth got out of the car and raised her chin at Eric as a greeting. Eric grinned, but he was cursing Murdoch in his heart. "Old man, are you trying to kill me? You want to bring your daughter to protect me as soon as you meet me? That's not right. Sooner or later, I'll play with your girl until she gets pregnant, and then abandon her." Murdoch hugged Eric, then looked at the villa next to him and said, "Eric, I've wanted to come and see you for a long time, but I haven't had the time." "Yes, everyone is so busy. Let's go in." Eric made an inviting gesture. Chapter 365. Eric was going to take Murdoch to the small living room, but after the old man entered the door, he took the initiative to go to Eric's study to take a look. Eric readily agreed. If Murdoch lowered himself to be a commercial spy, he would accept it. Not to mention that even in the study, the most important things were generally in the safe. When Jennifer Connolly walked into the study with a pot of coffee, she saw an old man in his 60s with his hands behind his back. He was standing by the wall full of scripts, looking up at the drawings on the wall, and admiring them from time to time. The woman quietly put the coffee pot on the coffee table, and walked softly to Eric's side. "Eric, is this part of the script for Jurassic Park?" Murdoch suddenly pointed to an area on the wall and asked. "Well, these are just preliminary ideas," Eric nodded. Elizabeth, who was standing next to her father, snorted discontentedly. "Maybe even the script has been written." Eric shrugged and made a whatever-you-say expression. Elizabeth suddenly became more proud. Murdoch didn't seem to see his daughter bickering with Eric. He continued to point to the drawings of several disaster movies and asked, "What about these?" Eric didn't intend to explain in detail to Murdoch as he did to Cameron. He just said lightly, "This is another series. Tsunamis, hurricanes, strong earthquakes, thousands of miles of ice, collision between heaven and earth. TSK. If these scenes on the drawings can be perfectly displayed on the big screen, the sensation it will cause will be no less than that of Star Wars," Murdoch praised from the bottom of his heart. Eric's large investment in the digital field was no secret in the industry. Many people thought that Eric had too much money and was hot-headed. Before seeing these drafts, Murdoch also had this idea. However, after seeing Eric's huge plan with his own eyes, the old man immediately understood that not only was Eric not hot-headed, but he was playing a very big game of chess. It definitely can't compare to Star Wars. "This series is very difficult to replicate," Eric said honestly. It wasn't that he was being modest, but Star Wars had become a cultural symbol, and the value it had generated was immeasurable. Although the planned Jurassic Park series and disaster film series would definitely cause a huge sensation, it was unrealistic to expect them to surpass the influence of Star Wars. Of course, if it was just based on box office, there was still a chance. Murdoch looked at it again, and then went to the sofa in the corner and sat down. Connolly felt that the study was not a place he should be. He squatted beside the coffee table and poured coffee for the three of them. Then he whispered to Eric, "Eric, I'll go out first." Eric nodded and looked at Elizabeth, who was sitting next to Murdoch. "Liz, someone has sent a lot of scripts over these days. TG hasn't decided on the next movie, right? You can go pick one with Jenny." Seeing that Eric was going to kick her out with his little vase, Elizabeth raised her eyebrows in dissatisfaction and glared at Eric. "Why don't you let me pick one here?" Eric said lightly. "You can't support the project here." Elizabeth, who felt that she was being looked down upon, was even angrier. She was about to refute when she saw her father give her a look. The girl snorted but didn't throw a tantrum. She stood up slowly and was about to go out when she saw Connolly standing next to Eric. She rolled her eyes and took the girl's arm intimately. "Miss Connolly, you're so beautiful. You smell so good. What perfume do you use?" Connolly glanced at Eric and was dragged out by Elizabeth. When she heard Elizabeth's words, she quickly said, "Thank you, Miss Murdoch. It's Chanel." Ah. As Connolly was speaking, he suddenly felt that he was grabbed by a small hand. He cried out in surprise and looked at Elizabeth beside him in disbelief. Because Eric was sitting facing the exit, he just happened to see the whole process of Elizabeth reaching out to grab Connolly. After the girl finished, she turned her head and looked at him as if to show off. The corner of Eric's mouth couldn't help but twitch. Is this taking advantage of me? Little girl, is it appropriate for a woman to do this? Murdoch followed Eric's surprised gaze and turned his head, only to see his daughter walking up the stairs with Connolly. Eric, what's wrong? Nothing. Eric shook his head and took a sip of coffee to calm himself down. After the two women left, the two drank coffee slowly and talked about the weather in Los Angeles for a while. Then Murdoch tentatively got to the point. Eric, I heard that you've been raising funds recently? Yes, because I have to do something, Eric said, quickly thinking about Murdoch's intentions. The less than $200 million drawn from several companies such as Firefly was certainly not enough to satisfy Eric. This money could only be expanded to $2 billion according to 10 times leverage. The expected profit was far from Eric's expectations. He needed more chips. Therefore, Eric had been trying his best to raise more funds during this period of time. His credit cards were all over the limit, and he didn't even let go of Virginia's, Nicole's, and the other women's money. Originally, a bank loan was the best way, but it would take at least a month to get a large sum of money from the bank. By that time, it would be August, and the war in Kuwait would break out. It would be too late to get the money. The matter of Eric speculating in crude oil futures was not a top secret. With Murdoch's strength, it was easy for him to know the inside story. Although he didn't know what was wrong with the little guy in front of him this time, Murdoch judged from his behavior that Eric was making a big gamble. Everyone knew that 9 out of 10 gambles would lose. Although Eric had made amazing achievements in Hollywood in just 2 years, Murdoch absolutely did not believe that Eric could replicate the same miracle on Wall Street. Therefore, he keenly felt that this was an excellent opportunity. Before entering this room, Murdoch's original plan was to lend Eric a sum of money. If Eric lost the money in the oil futures market, Murdoch could legitimately propose to redeem the 10% shares of Fox TV. Although Eric had not intervened in Fox's affairs before, the 10% shares were like a thorn that made Murdoch restless. But when he saw Eric's huge plan for several special effects blockbusters, Murdoch quickly changed his original plan. Compared to getting back the shares of the TV station, Murdoch felt that it was obviously a more cost-effective business if he could invest in Firefly. Eric, if you need funds, Fox can lend you some. What are the conditions? Murdoch went straight to the point. Eric did not beat around the bush. He put down the coffee cup in his hand and asked seriously. Murdoch relaxed on the sofa and said with a smile, "It depends on your sincerity. How much money can Fox come up with? I mean, within 10 days at most." 10 days. Murdoch straightened up again. Eric, 10 days is too short. Eric said, "Mr. Murdoch, if I have enough time, I will go directly to the bank for a loan. With my current net worth, I think any bank will be very happy to lend me hundreds of millions of dollars." Murdoch narrowed his eyes and looked at Eric for a while, as if to find some useful information from Eric's face, but the old fox was soon disappointed. "Well, I'll make a call first." Murdoch stood up and said. Eric pointed to the desk not far away. "Go ahead." Murdoch walked to the landline on his desk and dialed a few numbers. He didn't intend to hide anything from Eric and spoke directly to the other side. Eric listened attentively. Murdoch was roughly learning about the financial situation of News Corporation from News Corporation. Sitting back down on the sofa again, Murdoch said to Eric, "I can give you 80 million in 10 days. Noticing Eric's look of disdain, Murdoch was a little angry, but there was nothing he could do. "I know you've gathered nearly 200 million US dollars before, but News Corporation doesn't belong to me alone. I can't take all the cash away like you." Chapter 366. Okay, 80 million it is. Eric quickly understood Murdoch's situation. Although News Corporation was firmly controlled by Murdoch, The Murdoch family only had 40% of the shares. If Murdoch wanted to withdraw all the liquidity like Eric did with Firefly, he would definitely be strongly opposed by the other shareholders. Eric, I need to give the shareholders a full explanation for withdrawing $80 million in 10 days. If you don't pay back the money by the end of the year, I want to convert the funds into shares of Firefly. What do you think about 10%? 5%. Firefly is worth that price now. Although Eric was sure that he could pay back the money within 3 months, he was not willing to take the risk at all. Murdoch immediately shook his head and said, "No, Eric, I can't explain to the shareholders if it's 5%. I heard that you opened another shell production company." The two of them bargained back and forth for a while before finally settling on an agreement of 8%. After confirming the deal, the old man and the young girl walked out of the study. They could hear Elizabeth's laughter echoing in the hall from afar. "Liz, do you want to tear down my house with a sonic attack?" Eric asked jokingly when he found the two women sitting by the floor-to-ceiling window. "I want to tear you apart." Elizabeth, who was lying on the sofa reading the script, sat up and made way for her father to sit down. At the same time, she rolled her eyes at Eric. Eric walked to Connolly and sat down next to him. He asked the girl, "What were you laughing about?" "It's a script that imitates Tom Cruise's Top Gun, but it does take the comedy route, and the plot is very jumpy." Connolly tilted his head and thought for a while before he came up with a suitable adjective. Eric blurted out with some disdain, "It's Top Gun again. How can this movie be so easy to copy?" Although the original movie was claimed to cost less than $20 million, it was fully supported by the military at that time. It was a recruitment propaganda film itself. As he spoke, Eric suddenly remembered something and said to Elizabeth, "Liz, let me see the script." Elizabeth handed the script over. Eric glanced at the English title and couldn't recognize it for a moment. However, after flipping through a few pages, he quickly remembered the movie. The script in his hand was the famous American nonsensical comedy, Condor Rebel. In his memory, this movie was starring Charlie Sheen, the male lead of 2.5 Men. The movie had a plot similar to Top Gun, but the content was extremely parody. Not only did it imitate many classic Hollywood movies, but it also included a lot of mockery of famous people and events in recent years. In the early 1990s, most of the Hollywood comedies were still fairly standard. Therefore, the appearance of a complete spoof like The Fighting Condor immediately caused a sensation. Noticing the change in Eric's expression after seeing the script, Murdoch, who didn't care too much, became curious and asked in a low voice. Why Elizabeth leaned close to her father and said, "It's Fox's script." Hearing this, the old fox immediately relaxed. He poured himself a cup of coffee and waited patiently for Eric to open the script. "Eric, I saw this script first," why Elizabeth said immediately when Eric looked up. Eric handed the script to Connolly next to him and said to Elizabeth, "The script has been approved. Are you going to poach Fox?" "Humph, of course I won't do that, but don't forget what you said just now. Let me pick a script. I know you have 30% of the investment share. Give it to me." Eric directly threw the girl a "what did I just say?" expression, which made Elizabeth so angry that she almost jumped up. After lunch, after sending the Murdoch father and daughter away, Eric began to go to the Firefly headquarters to prepare for the premiere of Ghost in the evening. Regarding The Fighting Condor, Elizabeth then said a few words to Eric and gave up the right to ask for Eric's investment share. Although the girl had a bit of a temper, she was very shrewd and rational on important matters and would not make trouble without reason. There were 2 female characters in The Fighting Condor that had more scenes. One was a psychoanalyst, which was considered the female lead, and the other was a female pilot nicknamed Inward Shift. Among a large group of strong men, this character was quite eye-catching, but she didn't have many lines. Although Connolly was not satisfied with the 2 characters, Eric had already chosen the script, and the girl obediently chose the female lead role. The North American distribution of Ghost was the joint effort of Disney and Firefly. It could be said to be a big deal, with as many as 2,300 cinemas opening, and a grand premiere was held at the China Grand Theater in Hollywood. It wasn't even 6 o'clock in the evening, but celebrities had already started to appear on the long red carpet in front of the Chinese Grand Theater. Although the premiere of Die Hard 2 was just a few streets away, the premiere of Ghost was obviously more star-studded. In addition to the celebrities invited by Disney and Firefly, the families of the male and female protagonists of Ghost were also showing their support. The Coppola family and the Fonda family spared no effort to support the careers of their younger generations. The connections of these two families were enough to encircle half of Hollywood. Wow, Al Pacino and Robert De Niro are here together. It'll be strange if Jack Nicholson and Dustin Hoffman come again. That's not easy. It's good enough that two of them came. Look, Jodie Foster. She's still so beautiful. What a pity. I heard she's gay. It's just a rumor. What happened to Sinclair back then was a big blow to her. If it were me, I would probably have changed my sexual orientation. That's James Cameron, right? I heard that Terminator 2 has already started. I'm looking forward to it. Is the woman beside him his wife? She's so beautiful and elegant. She's probably an actress. Cher, why is she here? She worked with Nicolas Cage in Alluring Moonlight 3 years ago. I heard that they are good friends. I still prefer her singing. Almost every few minutes, a star-studded figure appeared on the red carpet, causing waves of screams and discussions. Originally, there were only a few hundred movie fans on both sides of the red carpet. However, in less than half an hour, the entire street was filled with movie fans who had heard the news and rushed over. Even many movie fans who were originally attending the premiere of Die Hard 2 came over. Fox was extremely embarrassed, but there was nothing they could do. As the director, Eric didn't even have time to appear on the red carpet before he had to start socializing with the guests who came to support him. At this time, the movie fans who were dazzled by the stars would probably not care if he, the director, appeared on the red carpet or not. Eric, I especially went to watch the test screening. This movie was very well made, especially the two pieces of music at the beginning and the end. They directly sublimated the theme of the movie to the extreme. Francis Coppola, who had specially rushed over from the set of The Godfather 3, patted Eric on the shoulder and praised. Eric looked at Cage, who was standing quietly beside Coppola, and said, "Nick's performance was also far beyond my expectations. Perhaps in the near future, the Coppola family will have an Oscar winner." "Haha, that's for sure," Coppola said proudly. Westerners didn't have the habit of being too humble. After greeting Coppola and his nephew, Eric quickly shuttled through the crowd to greet them. After circling around, he was just about to find a corner to rest against the wall for a while, when he felt a pair of large hands pressing on his shoulders. He turned his head and saw the aggressive James Cameron, and the meaningful smile on Catherine Bigelow's face. "Jim, Kate, how are you? Thank you for coming." Eric hurriedly greeted them. James Cameron, however, didn't have the polite smile he had on the red carpet. With a straight face he asked, "Eric, where's the money? The casting for Terminator 2 has already started, but Black Ant's finance department told me that the company has no money. How am I going to get the deposit to sign the contract with the union? Also, Sten also told me that you suddenly took away all the liquidity in the digital sector. Isn't there still a few $100,000? Eric asked subconsciously. Cameron had the urge to strangle Eric. "What can a few $100,000 do? Tell me." Okay, Jim. Don't worry. 1 month. I need that money for a month. After a month, you can have as much as you want." Cameron was about to ask what he was going to do this month, but when he heard the meaning in Eric's words, he immediately changed his mind. "I want to increase the budget. At least 20 million more." "No problem." Eric nodded readily. Seeing that Cameron was about to speak again, he immediately said, "No more." "Okay, then what about this month?" Cameron asked. Eric said, "Take your time with the casting. You can go to Stan and figure out how to implement the liquid robot together. I heard that they developed a transformation software for this last time. By the way, Kate, Thriller Point might have to be pushed back a little." "I don't have a problem with that." Catherine Bigelow smiled and said, "Anyway, if it drags on, the movie can only be scheduled for next year's Easter slot at the earliest. You're the one who loses out. Kate is still the most reasonable one. Jim, you have to learn from your wife." Eric teased without leaving a trace. The woman immediately glared at him. Because there were too many celebrities attending the premiere, the ceremony started 20 minutes later than expected. Eric sat in his seat and had just watched the movie for a while when he realized that Michael Eisner had asked Coppola, who was next to him, to move aside. Michael sat down next to him and said, "Eric, I heard that you need money recently." Chapter 367. Another guy with the same idea as Michael Eisner. Eric felt very happy. At this time, what he needed most was a large amount of cash. Disney had delivered itself to his door. Even if Eric didn't like Michael Eisner, he didn't intend to refuse. But on the surface, Eric asked without any ridicule, "Does Disney still have money?" Michael Eisner's face suddenly became a little ugly. During the summer, Disney's Bowie had released 4 movies. Except for an unknown small production that acted as an agent for another production company, the other movies were all big productions with investments of more than $30 million. In addition to Firebird Strikes Out and The Rocket Expert, at the end of June, Disney also released Little Devil. This movie was produced in cooperation with Spielberg's Abe Film Company. It told the story of a small town that was invaded by mutated spiders. The movie was now in its 3rd week of screening, and the total box office was only $30 million. With the production cost of 3 movies and the publicity investment, Disney's loss during the summer had exceeded $100 million. Ghost was jointly released by Disney and Firefly. Because Disney didn't participate in the investment, Disney could only get 10% of the distribution share. The income from the subsequent videos was even less. Therefore, even if Ghost sold well according to the pattern in his previous life, it would still be difficult to make up for Disney's loss. It could be imagined that Disney's financial results at the end of the year would be very bad. "Eric, you don't have to worry about this. If you need money, I can lend you $100 million, Michael Eisner said lightly. "I'm in a hurry. I want it in 10 days, Eric added. Michael Eisner suppressed the joy in his eyes and said, "No problem. But Eric, since you want the money in 10 days, then you have to return the money in 3 months. Otherwise, Firefly's shares?" Eric took the initiative to say. Michael Eisner nodded. "My request is the same as Mr. Murdoch's. $100 million at 10%. "Okay," Eric said without hesitation. According to the previous plan, Eric had planned to stop within 3 months. After reaching an agreement, Eric thought about it and quickly showed a faint smile. "Mr. Eisner, why don't you play too? This is a good opportunity." Michael Eisner shook his head. "I'm sorry, Eric. I never participate in such bets that I have no confidence in winning." "Me too." Eric turned his head to look at the big screen and said in his heart. Originally, Eric planned to return to New York the day after the premiere, but what happened next forced him to stay in Los Angeles for a few more days. Perhaps they had heard the news from Fox or Disney, but the executives of the 7 major film companies came to Eric one after another to compete to be the child of wealth. Even the rundown MGM sent him $50 million, and Eric accepted it all. Of course, he also mortgaged more than 50% of Firefly's shares for this. Except for the repayment date discussed with Murdoch, which was half a year later, the other companies only borrowed for 3 months at most. Warner even proposed a repayment period of 2 months, but Warner also offered the most money, reaching $150 million. Eric did not hesitate to accept it. A few days later, Eric returned to New York. The results of the 2 most watched summer blockbuster movies, Die Hard 2 and Ghost, were officially released. Due to the popularity of the first movie, Die Hard 2 earned $24 million in box office in 3 days in the first week. Ghost was not like in his previous life where it suddenly became a blockbuster. This version of Ghost had reached the limit of what the film companies of this era could achieve in terms of publicity and attention. Therefore, in the first 3 days of the first week, Ghost brought away countless tears from the fans and also collected $27 million at the box office. After the results were released, the box office statistics agency estimated that the box office of both movies would exceed $40 million in the first week. Before that, Total Memory, the highest-grossing movie in the first week of the 1990 summer, only earned 36 million US dollars. However, the two movies released at the same time in 1 week both exceeded 40 million US dollars in box office. This amazing result also surprised many people who were expecting the two movies to lose. At this time, Eric was not in the mood to pay attention to the movie. In the suite of the 60 Soho Hotel on 6th Avenue, Chris, who found out that more than 500 million US dollars had been added to his account, looked at Eric with a serious expression. He did not tell Jeffrey the news. These days, Jeffrey was already worried enough. If the old man knew that Eric had mortgaged more than 50% of Firefly's shares, he would probably go crazy. Eric, I thought you were just being hot-headed, but now I think you are really crazy. Chris, don't worry. Even if I lose all this money, I will not lose control of Firefly. I have already asked Carolyn to use my remaining 20% shares to apply for a loan. The loan will definitely be completed within 3 months, and I can't lose it all. So, in the end, I will definitely be able to redeem enough shares to maintain the absolute control of Firefly. Eric repeated the words that he had originally thought of. You know that's not what I'm talking about. Eric, I think you have completely lost your mind. Stop, it's not too late. You see, in the past 10 days, we have invested 120 million US dollars, but now the account is not making much profit. Imagine if Saddam blackmailed the other small Middle Eastern countries and got enough benefits from Kuwait, and then stopped, the price of crude oil will immediately drop sharply. As long as the drop is close to 10%, Eric, just 10%, all the funds in your account will disappear. Eric rubbed his hair in distress. Chris, why can't you have a little more confidence in me? Because this is a very realistic world. No one knows what will happen in the future. Eric, I won't allow you to mess around anymore. I won't touch a cent of the 500 million US dollars. If you want to buy it by force, then I will withdraw immediately. Eric calmed down, and the relaxed expression on his face disappeared. He was silent for a long time, and then whispered to Chris. Before that, can you help me find an acquaintance to help me? You know, I don't have any connections on Wall Street. Chris was stunned. He sighed, stood up, and walked out of the hotel room in loneliness. Eric did not get up to see him off. He hugged Drew, who had been sitting quietly beside him, and put her head on his knee. He lowered his head and stroked the little girl's smooth face. Girl, if one day I let you down, will you be sad? The little girl licked Eric's palm like a cat, and shook her head. No. But I made Chris sad. In this world, there are not many people who really care about me. Jeffrey and Chris are too. At least you still have me. Drew put Eric's palm on her face and said solemnly. The next day, Eric woke up early in the morning, brushed his teeth, washed his face and ate breakfast mechanically. He walked to the office of the trading studio and saw Chris at first glance. It was rare for him to feel that his eyes were a little wet. I'm worried. Let me do it, Chris explained in a low voice. Eric stepped forward and gave Chris a bear hug. He did not let Chris go until Chris was out of breath. Chapter 368. Because of the large amount of funds and Eric's willful request, the trading team began to increase the volume of crude oil futures in the next few days, increasing the original daily investment to more than 30 million US dollars. By mid-July, Eric had invested 250 million US dollars in the futures market. Because crude oil prices had been fluctuating for the past 2 weeks, this amount of money had not increased, which made Chris even more worried. On July 16th, early in the morning, a piece of news published in the New York Times quickly spread around the world. In the early morning of July 16th, the Iraqi Communist Party and the National Guard, an elite armored tank division fully equipped with Soviet-made equipment, suddenly gathered at the Iraq-Kuwait border. At the same time, there was another shocking piece of news from the bilateral negotiations. Iraqi President Saddam Hussein proposed new conditions. Not only did he ask Kuwait to cancel the previous loan of 14 billion US dollars, he also asked Kuwait to compensate $2.4 billion US dollars for stealing Iraqi oil. The Western countries that had been paying attention to the situation in the Middle East had not made any response, but the most sensitive financial markets had begun to fluctuate violently. On July 16th, it was a new week. After the world's major futures exchanges opened, crude oil prices, which had been hovering between 18 and 20 US dollars per barrel, quickly broke through the 20 US dollars mark. In less than 2 hours, it had rushed to 21 US dollars. For the rest of the day, crude oil prices did not fall again. At the end of the day, crude oil prices stayed at a high of 21.40 US dollars, an increase of 7%. That night, Jeffrey and his son did not return to Chris's apartment. Instead, they gathered in Eric's hotel suite. Chris was not happy that the crude oil prices had skyrocketed today, and that Eric's account had a profit of 175 million US dollars in just one day. Instead, he was even more worried. The fax machine in the suite buzzed nonstop, and documents continued to appear one after another. Jeffrey, Chris, and Eric were all silently reading the documents from the fax machine. Only Drew was still watching TV on the sofa. "That's all the information I can get, Eric," Chris said after passing all the documents around. "As you can see, almost all the military experts think that Iraq is bluffing and that the possibility of war breaking out is very small. This armored division equipped with Soviet-made T-72 tanks is enough to flatten Kuwait. If Iraq wants to invade Kuwait, they don't even need to send the Communist Party and the National Guard. A normal infantry division is enough to take down Kuwait City. The reason why Saddam did this was because he wanted to extort more benefits. I still stand by my initial guess. Eric, this news will be reported tomorrow, and the price of crude oil will fall again. In order to not lose the money we earned today, I suggest we start selling tomorrow morning. Maybe we can still keep a profit of about 100 million US dollars. No, continue to buy, Chris. I feel that the time is getting closer. Chris looked at Jeffrey, who didn't really understand the conversation, and said, "Then in the future, the price of crude oil will definitely fluctuate more violently. I need enough reserve money in my account." Eric knew that Chris was telling the truth. Compared to the first 2 weeks of July, where the price didn't change much, with the participation of the Middle East and the West, the price of crude oil would fluctuate more violently in the second half of July. "No problem, you can do it according to the situation." Seeing that Eric wasn't stubborn this time, Chris heaved a sigh of relief. On July 17th, the analysis articles that Eric and the others had read the night before appeared on the pages of major newspapers around the world. Even a senior official from the United States Department of National Defense publicly agreed that Iraq would never use force against Kuwait in a television interview. Because of this opinion, the price of crude oil fell back to 20.70 US dollars, down 3%. But in the following week, the price of crude oil began to slowly rise again. After Iraq deployed an elite armored division at the border of Iraq, they didn't stop. Instead, they continued to increase the number of troops. In less than a week, 100,000 Iraqi troops had gathered at the border of Iraq. The head of Kuwait, the emir, couldn't sit still anymore. He began to beg the heads of other Arab countries to mediate. On July 22nd, Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak visited Baghdad to speak for the emir of Kuwait. He didn't get any promises from Saddam and quickly left. Later, Arafat, the chairman of the Liberation Front of the Republic of Stan of Palestine, also visited Baghdad. Saddam warmly welcomed them. When he saw them off, he only asked Arafat to pass a message to the emir. The message was very simple: pay up. Although most of the Western countries still insisted that Saddam wouldn't use force against Kuwait, in the face of Iraq's aggression, on July 24th, the U.S. aircraft carrier fleet in the Persian Gulf and the UAE jointly held a joint military exercise. At this time, the international price of crude oil had risen to 23 US dollars. Compared to a week ago, the increase was as high as 15%. Eric's capital invested in the futures market had reached 400 million US dollars, and the weekly profit was as high as 500 million US dollars. Such a terrifying profit was crazy. But Chris persuaded Eric to stop more than once, because if the situation in the Middle East took a big turn, the money could be lost again at any time. The military exercise of the U.S. to deter Iraq seemed to have some effect. The next day, Saddam urgently summoned the U.S. ambassador to Iraq, April Glass. Saddam solemnly promised the Arab female ambassador that Iraq would never use force against Kuwait. This news seemed to be a turning point. In the next few days, the price of crude oil began to slowly fall. Most of the investment institutions began to look down on crude oil prices. In this case, more and more speculators began to crazily short crude oil. No matter how many contracts entered the market, they were quickly digested. In the last week at the end of July, Eric spent all the $700 million capital in his hand. Because of the fall in crude oil prices in the last week, the original $500 million surplus was almost gone. Because of Eric's strong insistence, he bought the last $20 million crude oil futures contract. Chris almost collapsed in his chair. $700 million was a big bet with 10 times leverage and almost no reserve margin. As long as the price of crude oil fell by $2, the $700 million would instantly disappear. And if the price of crude oil fell by more than $2, Eric's account would be breached. Not only would the $700 million be swallowed by the capital market, but Eric would also owe a huge debt to the futures company, and even face bankruptcy. At this point, there were many things that could not be hidden from Jeffrey. The old man was shocked by the figure of $700 million for a while, but only sighed. In Los Angeles, many people in Hollywood were paying attention to Eric's every move. Therefore, the news that Ghost broke the $100 million box office in 3 weeks was not so important. After Basic Instinct was released, there were not many media outlets who took the opportunity to attack Eric because of his identity as the screenwriter. Everyone seemed to be waiting for the moment of the final judgment to come. Finally, time this cold bitch twisted her small waist and stepped into the grid of August 1990. Chapter 369. While most people were still skeptical about whether Iraq would invade Kuwait, at 6 o'clock in the morning on August 1, Kuwait time, Iraq's 8 combat divisions gathered at the border of Iraq quickly launched an attack formation in just one day. The radio communication that was originally in a silent state also began to send out dense encrypted messages. The U.S. military, who observed all this through military spy satellites, realized that Saddam was really going to do something. But it was all too late. The Pentagon only had time to send a special level war warning to the Kuwaiti authorities. At 1 o'clock in the morning on August 2, Kuwait time, with Saddam's order, Iraq's 100,000 troops crossed the border of Iraq and swept into Kuwait. The news of the war spread around the world in less than an hour, shocking the world. The moment the war broke out was exactly 6 o'clock in the evening on August 1. And before the close of the day, well-informed investment institutions seized the last opportunity to enter the crude oil futures market. In just 2 hours before the close of the day, the price of crude oil rose by $0.7 and closed at $21.60, an increase of 3%. However, for the speculators who had invested a huge amount of money in the crude oil futures market, this was just the beginning. A door had opened, and some people had stepped into heaven, and some people had stepped into hell. When the war broke out, everyone in Eric's team breathed a sigh of relief. Although they still had a lot of doubts in their hearts, they finally had a good night's sleep after more than a month. In a corner of the Persian Gulf, the sound of cannons rumbled. In the suite of the 60 Suhau Hotel, Eric hugged his girlfriend and slept very soundly. At midnight in New York, it happened to be dawn in the Persian Gulf. The Iraqi army only took 8 hours to occupy the entire territory of Kuwait. After 17 hours, the war was completely over. Saddam announced to the world that Kuwait had merged with Iraq and became Iraq's 19th province. The Emir of Kuwait took his family and fled to Saudi Arabia in a helicopter. New York, Thursday, August 2. After a good night's rest, Eric and Drew had breakfast together. At 9 o'clock, they met with Chris and the trading team. At this time, everyone in the team looked at Eric with surprise and doubt, but Eric had no intention to explain to anyone. In a coffee shop on 6th Avenue, Eric and Chris were sitting opposite each other. A young girl wearing a pair of aviator sunglasses was stirring the coffee in front of her. There was still an hour before the start of crude oil futures trading. Everyone was taking a short break here. Dad will fly back to the farm in Maryland at 10 o'clock. Emily has already sent him to the airport. He also said that he doesn't want to see you, the little bastard who made him worried for a month again. Chris said with a faint smile, but the doubt in his eyes was not concealed at all. Eric laughed and said, "Let's get down to business." Chris didn't seem to want to get to the bottom of it. He continued, "All right, what do you plan to do next?" Eric shrugged. "I've done what I can. Next, it's the stage for you professionals." Chris nodded. What Eric had done was to put a lot of pressure on the crude oil futures market. This was not an easy thing to do. Chris couldn't understand where Eric got his premonition from. A month ago, there were no clues about the war in Kuwait. Now Iraq's invasion of Kuwait had become a reality. The two countries occupied a quarter of the proven oil reserves. Once the two countries merged, Saddam's policy of reducing crude oil production and increasing the price of crude oil would inevitably cause the international price of crude oil to soar. Then you should at least give me a general plan. For example, when are we going to withdraw from this game of chess? Eric looked at the traffic outside the window and thought for a while. After a while he said, 3 months. We will clear out the market within 3 months. Chris showed an interested look. He put his arms on the table and leaned closer. He whispered, 3 months? Eric, can you tell me what your premonition is this time? Eric said in a low voice, I have a premonition that on the last day of October, many ghosts will appear in the streets of the Federation. They will take away countless candies from the hands of thousands of families. Drew, who had been listening attentively, burst out laughing. Chris also rolled his eyes. After making a joke, Eric spread out his hands. Chris, I'm not a psychic really. So don't ask me what my premonition is. Being able to bet on the right situation this time was largely due to luck. Alright, then I won't ask. I will follow your arrangement and leave within 3 months. After saying that, Chris began to focus on the snacks and coffee in front of him. Eric was secretly relieved. He didn't know how to explain this to Chris. It seemed that he would never be able to explain it clearly. Because the electronic trading system only started to be used in the futures market in 1992, the crude oil futures trading was still mainly done manually. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the crude oil futures market opened. The price began to rise at a very steep curve. Eric and his girlfriend walked around the bustling trading hall. They couldn't take it anymore and left. Just as he said in the coffee shop, he had already done what he could in July. Now everything could be left to Chris and the trading team. After returning to the hotel with Drew, Eric was stopped by the receptionist at the front desk. Mr. Williams, please wait a moment. Eric looked at her in confusion. The waitress handed him a piece of paper filled with phone numbers. This is the number of people who called you after you went out in the morning. They said that they couldn't get through to your cell phone or the landline in your room. Oh, I turned it off to prevent being disturbed, Eric explained. He took the note, thanked the receptionist, and went back to the room with Drew. Eric, who's calling? In the elevator, the little girl poked her head out and looked at the note in Eric's hand. A group of old men in Los Angeles, Eric said casually. Drew saw the names such as Rupert Murdoch, Michael Eisner, Steve Ross, and others. He looked away in boredom. Back in the room, Eric connected the phone line and dialed the number in his hand. As soon as the call connected, Eric immediately pursed his lips and put on a distressed look. Mr. Murdoch, I'm sorry, I wasn't in a good mood before, so I unplugged the phone line. No, it's okay. It's hard to say now. A few minutes later, just as Eric hung up the phone, he caught a glimpse of the girl on the sofa hugging a pillow and rolling around happily. Eric reached out and gestured in front of his mouth, making a zipper action. The girl immediately nodded sensibly. The trading team hired by Eric had signed a strict confidentiality agreement before. At the same time, they would also receive a huge commission from this transaction. As beneficiaries, these people would certainly not divulge the details of this transaction, not to mention Jeffrey and his son. In addition, Drew was the only one who knew the details of this transaction. Although Eric knew that his girlfriend would definitely not betray him, he still explained it at this time in case the girl accidentally leaked something. With Drew's shrewdness, Eric believed that the girl would know what to do with just one action. After explaining, Eric dialed the numbers again one by one. Although many people knew that Eric had placed a heavy bet on the futures market, they did not know whether it was a rise or a short. After all, because of the soaring price of crude oil in the past few months, there were more speculators who chose to short than long. Because even if Iraq deployed a large number of troops on the border of Iraq, most people still did not believe that a war would break out in the Middle East. Unfortunately, Saddam's behavior this time was beyond the expectations of a large number of people. After spending some time answering the calls one by one, Eric returned to the sofa and turned on the TV. He chose the NBC News channel. At this time, the news in the Middle East was rolling live on the TV. Drew came over and said with a smile, "Eric, I think it's impossible to hide it." "It's just delaying the news," Eric said with a smile. "Those are all old foxes, it's impossible to hide it from them." The girl made a face. "Then you just... What if they get too excited when they hear the news and have a heart attack?" "It seems like I'm actually a good person," Eric joked. The girl laughed a few times and said, "I'm a good person too." After 5.5 hours of trading, at 2:30 in the afternoon, the price of crude oil on the New York Mercantile Exchange soared from $21.60 to $23.5. The increase reached a crazy 8%. Eric's account had a profit of $600 million that day. During dinner, Chris reported the good news to Eric. However, Eric saw a touch of sadness on Chris' face. After asking, Chris revealed the truth. "A good friend of mine at Morgan Stanley called after the market closed to ask about the situation here. I asked him about the relevant information some time ago, and he knows that I've been speculating in oil futures." Eric asked in confusion. He knew that Chris only told him the beginning of the story. Chris said faintly, "A senior executive at Morgan Stanley used $120 million from the headquarters to short crude oil futures, which is 10 times the leverage. After the market closed in the afternoon, he jumped off the building." Eric also went silent. Chris adjusted his emotions and said, "Eric, I don't know how you made the judgment this time, but I believe that you did it because you were absolutely confident. But in the future, please don't do it again." Eric nodded solemnly. "I promise." Chris stood up and patted Eric's shoulder. Just as he was about to leave, Drew rushed in with a bunch of shopping bags. He yelled, "Eric, I saw someone jump off a building when I was passing by Fifth Avenue. Their shopping bags were scattered all over the ground. It's so disgusting. I heard that several people have already jumped off a building." After the girl finished talking, she noticed that the two men in the room were a little upset. She immediately stuck out her tongue, shrunk her neck, and slipped into her room. Chris shook his head and said, "I don't like this girl. She's disagreeable and too cold." Eric looked at Drew's door and said, "If it weren't for Drew connecting me and Jeffrey, I wouldn't be who I am now, and Firefly wouldn't exist." Chris obviously knew the details of what happened back then. He shrugged and said, "Okay, pretend I didn't say anything." "Okay, Chris, she's just a kid. She'll grow up eventually." Chris shook his head again and said, "If you're not 100% sure that you can control her, you should let her go." "I know." Eric smiled and walked Chris to the elevator before returning to his room. The girl had already returned to the living room. She sat cross-legged on the sofa angrily and said, "I heard it all." Eric stepped forward and pinched the girl's face. "Did Chris wrongly accuse you?" "Humph." The girl turned her head and wanted to shake off Eric's hand. "Chris had a colleague who jumped off a building this afternoon. You were so happy just now. Don't tell me you expect him to say something good about you?" "But I just don't like him talking about me like that." "Eric, do you also think that I'm that kind of person?" Eric took the girl into his arms and hugged her lovingly. "You're you. You don't care what others say. You'll always be my girl. Okay." The girl affectionately rested her chin on Eric's shoulder. "Eric, I love you." "I know. Then when will you start loving me?" "That's a little difficult." Eric joked. "Look, you've gained weight recently. I don't like fat girls." "No way." The girl immediately hammered Eric's back with dissatisfaction. I weigh myself every week. I'm not fat at all. Before going to bed at night, Eric had already heard more than 10 news of people jumping off buildings because of today's crude oil price. Although he didn't show it on his face and was still laughing with the girl, Eric was still quite touched. The futures market was a gambling market. The contracts were all two-way. If you bet on the price going up, then someone else would buy the price going down. Because of today's crude oil price, Eric made $600 million in one day, which meant that someone lost $600 million. Those people deserved it. Who asked them to come in without leaving a way out? The girl took a shower and snuggled up to Eric, who was reading a book. Why do I feel like you're scolding me too? No, we're the winners. The winner owns everything. The winner? Eric exclaimed. He looked at the futures guide that hadn't been flipped in a long time. He didn't know when, but a line of Chinese characters was written on the page with a pencil. According to Lord Mo's words, a general's success is built on thousands of bones. He didn't know if it was because this type of language was rarely used, but the running script on the paper was a bit messy. Eric. The girl curled up in the quilt suddenly blinked her eyelashes and meowed twice. Eric patted the girl's head. Go to sleep first. I'll read for a while. Drew scratched Eric's body unhappily. All right, you've succeeded in creating another lame joke. Eric couldn't help but laugh. He looked at the brightly lit Manhattan outside the window. Eric picked up the pencil and quickly scribbled a few strokes on the page in front of him. The first half of the poem was quickly erased, leaving only the last 7 words. Chapter 370. From the beginning of August, Eric stayed in New York for another half a month before returning to Los Angeles. What returned earlier than Eric was the cash flow he withdrew from several of his companies. With the return of hundreds of millions of dollars to Firefly and other companies, the companies that had panicked because of the sudden depletion of funds quickly returned to normal operations. Firefly's CFO, Carolyn Elliott, also quietly withdrew the loan application from Citibank in early August. At this time, even the slowest person realized that Eric had won the bet. In the Middle East, after Saddam annexed Kuwait, he did not stop his offensive. After eliminating the internal resistance in Kuwait, he directly pressed against the border of Saudi Arabia. If the annexation of Kuwait only shocked the Western countries, then Saddam's actions at this time made most of the Western countries feel fear. Because Saudi Arabia, which had a land area of more than 2 million square kilometers, only had 70,000 conventional troops. On average, it was worse than Kuwait, not to mention the ability to resist Iraq's invasion. Once Saddam invaded Saudi Arabia again and blocked the Persian Gulf, then the Western countries would completely lose control of the Middle East. The proven crude oil reserves of Iraq, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia accounted for 45% of the world's total reserves, and the remaining 55% were scattered around the world. Therefore, once Iraq annexed Saudi Arabia again, then Saddam would shout a high price of $100 per barrel, and the Western countries could only obediently pay the price. In the face of such an obvious threat from Iraq, the Arab countries that originally did not want the West to intervene in the Middle East quickly compromised and accepted the United States' proposal to send troops. At the same time, the Western countries quickly imposed large-scale sanctions on Iraq. Not only did they freeze hundreds of billions of dollars of overseas assets of Iraq and Kuwait, but they also imposed the strictest embargo on Iraq. However, all of this did not stop the price of crude oil from soaring. Because the Iraqi army was ready to attack Saudi Arabia, within a week, the price of crude oil soared to $29, an increase of more than 40%. It was not until August 7, 1990, that the Pentagon announced that the most elite 82nd Airborne Division of the Federation had arrived in Saudi Arabia that the price of crude oil slowed down. By the time Eric returned to Los Angeles, more than 100,000 U.S. troops had entered the Persian Gulf and were in a standoff with the Iraqi army. The rise in international crude oil prices slowed down again, but in the face of an imminent war, the rise in oil prices showed no signs of stopping. A black helicopter landed at Praia Vista in the western suburbs of Los Angeles. Eric disembarked from the helicopter with a group of people. After exchanging greetings with the heads of the administrative district, Eric turned to Stan Winston and said, "Stan, what do you think of this place? Less than 100 meters ahead is the former Howard Hughes Airport. Of course, it's abandoned now. I plan to buy about 100 hectares of land here to build a filming base for Firefly." Stan Winston looked around and said, "I can only be sure that you've made a lot of money this time." Eric smiled and didn't continue the topic. Now, many people who knew that he speculated in oil futures some time ago were curious about how much money he had made. During this period of time, they had been probing him openly and secretly. But now, even he didn't know the exact number because it would take 3 months to wrap up in New York. Noticing Eric's expression, Stan Winston also laughed. He was just casually teasing him and quickly changed the topic to the matter at hand. "This place is less than 5 kilometers away from Venice. If you want to build a filming base here, the special effects studio of Digital Domain might be able to move here. The Tyrannosaurus Rex model in Jurassic Park is 20 feet tall, so it needs a lot of space to operate." "I've already considered this point," Eric said. "Not only do I want to build a regular studio here, but I also want to build a special effects studio. Stan, if you're willing, you can be in charge of this studio." Stan Winston was slightly excited, but he still said cautiously, "Eric, the geographical conditions here are indeed good, but there's a big drawback. It's too far from downtown Los Angeles and transportation is very inconvenient. If you follow your plan, you'll need a lot of professionals. I've also considered this. I'll pay for the construction of the entire system's infrastructure here, including residential areas, supermarkets, schools, and so on," Eric said quickly. Stan Winston was only a little surprised, but the executives of Praia Vista beside Eric were already beyond excited. If Eric's plan came to fruition, it would be a great boost to the economic development of the district. "Mr. Williams, is what you said true?" A tall and thin middle-aged Caucasian man couldn't help but ask. "Of course," Eric said seriously. "But if you're willing to cooperate fully, I can guarantee that this project won't take more than 3 years, and the total investment won't be less than $1 billion. The executives of Praia Vista beside Eric whispered to each other. A $1 billion project was something they didn't even dare to think about before. They didn't expect to come across such a good deal. Eric, on the other hand, continued to lead Stan Winston and the others forward. The reason why Eric chose this area was not on a whim, but because in his memory, the DreamWorks that Spielberg and the others had created in his previous life had chosen to film here. Many years later, this area had developed into the famous Praia Vista community. Many famous movies had chosen to film here, such as the Iron Man series. Eric spent the whole morning touring Praia Vista and discussed the preliminary plan with the executives. When it was close to noon, a group of people stood by a man-made lake and pointed at the surrounding terrain. Suddenly, an SUV drove up to them, and a few people got out of the car. Currently, Praia Vista was still in the suburbs of Los Angeles. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it was sparsely populated. So the sudden appearance of the off-road vehicle attracted everyone's attention. Quite a number of them realized that the people in the car had something to do with them. As expected, when the people got out of the car, Eric immediately recognized the tall woman walking in front. He was a little surprised to see Nicole here. In the distance, Nicole spoke to her bodyguard. Soon, she walked over with a blonde woman in her 30s. When she was about 4 to 5 meters away from Eric, the tall woman showed a faint look of resentment. She didn't bother to hide her gaze and locked onto Eric. Eric noticed the gazes on his left and right and looked at the woman helplessly. "Nicole, how did you know I was here?" "Yeah, it wasn't easy to find you." Nicole didn't answer the question and only grumbled softly. Eric didn't ask further. Only a few people knew about his whereabouts. He knew where Nicole got the news from. Eric turned to the blonde woman beside Nicole. "And this is..." "Nice to meet you, Mr. Williams. I'm Parker Kingsley." Eric looked the woman up and down in surprise. He only remembered casually telling Nicole this. He didn't expect Nicole to have changed agents in just a few months. After shaking hands with her, Eric smiled and said, "Hello, Miss Kingsley. How has cruise been recently?" "Very good. Thank you for your concern," Parker Kingsley said politely. At the same time, she secretly looked at the young man in front of her. Although Eric and Cruz had worked together before, at that time, Cruz's agent was Paula Wagner. Therefore, this was the first time the two met. After exchanging some pleasantries, Eric looked at his watch and said to Nicole, "Nicole, you came at a bad time. I'm going back." The woman's eyes suddenly became resentful again. "Do you hate seeing me that much?" Hearing the woman's words, Parker Kingsley raised her eyebrows slightly and quickly took a few steps back, leaving the couple some space to talk. Eric shook his head. "No, I'm telling the truth." "Then can I be a guest at your place?" the woman asked again. "Okay, but I came here by helicopter. Maybe you'll have to let your bodyguards and assistants go back by themselves." The resentment on Nicole's face immediately disappeared. She nodded excitedly. "I'll tell them now." After a while, Eric and Nicole took the helicopter back to Malibu. As for Stan Winston, Parker Kingsley, and the others, they were smart enough not to be third wheels. Half an hour later, the helicopter landed on the tarmac of the Sharp Corner Manor. Eric took the woman to the villa and asked casually, "When did you change agents? Why didn't I know?" "You've never cared about me, so how could you know?" I still listened to your suggestion and changed." Eric coughed awkwardly and quickly changed the topic. "What do you think of her?" "She's okay." Parker suggested that I take the low-key and mysterious path of acting and try to keep a distance from the public. Other than that, I don't see anything special about her. Eric only nodded slightly and didn't express any opinion. In his previous life, Pi Kingsley was able to manage Tom Cruise's business in an orderly manner. Cruise's image had been maintained perfectly for more than 10 years, so it was obvious that this route was very practical. He opened the door and walked into the living room with the woman. The villa seemed empty. Although Drew returned to Los Angeles with Eric, he only stayed at the Sharp Corner Manor for a day before returning to Culver City. At the same time, he began to work on TG's second movie with Elizabeth. Connolly, on the other hand, had already joined the cast of Condor Rebel. With Eric's approval, Fox had given the green light to the movie and had already started filming. Hence, Eric was once again the only person left in the villa. The servants of the manor usually did not come here. From the bottom of his heart, Eric actually enjoyed the feeling of living alone. "Have a seat first. I'll call for takeout," Eric said to Nicole casually. "Let me make lunch. What do you want to eat?" Eric didn't refuse and said, "I don't know. Anything will do." The woman nodded and walked to the kitchen. Although Nicole didn't come to the Sharp Corner Manor often, she was quite familiar with the villa. Eric went upstairs to take a shower and changed into a new set of clothes. When he came out, Nicole had already put a simple lunch on the table. Eric sat down at the table and watched as the woman served him lunch. He then said, "By the way, how did your movie turn out?" Nicole, who had just picked up her knife and fork, paused and said disappointedly, "Flop." Okay, let's eat first," Eric said quickly. At the same time, he realized why Nicole was here today. However, when they were raising funds some time ago, Eric took $8 million from Nicole. This was probably all of her savings for the past year. Maybe it was also the salary from the movie that failed. As for what the movie was, Eric thought about it but couldn't remember. This was also why Nicole hated Eric. The woman thought that her relationship with Eric should be closer than Julia Roberts. But now Julia had 3 movies in a row: Pretty Woman, Steel Magnolias, and Sleeping with the Enemy, which broke the $100 million box office, but she only got Sleepless in Seattle. After that, Eric didn't care about her anymore. The last movie was chosen by Nicole's original agent together with her. Sleepless in Seattle had just become a success, and without Eric's participation, the woman didn't dare to rashly change the direction of the movie. She still chose a romantic comedy. In the end, after it was released in July, almost a month later, it only made $10 million in box office. Because this movie was also a romantic comedy, she received $5 million. The total cost was $30 million, and the box office was at least $60 million to recoup the cost. Under the current situation, it would be good if the total box office exceeded $20 million. because she became famous with a romantic comedy like Sleepless in Seattle. She was now a flop in the genre she was best at. If she didn't work hard to find a turnaround, she might soon become a box office poison. What was even more annoying was that during this period of time, she had contacted Eric several times, but this little bastard in front of her used all kinds of excuses to evade her. Nicole couldn't take it anymore and drove directly to the suburbs to find Eric today. "By the way, I have something for you later. I hope you like it." Eric ate lunch and felt that the atmosphere was a little cold, so he quickly found a topic to talk about. Chapter 371. This was the first time Eric had given her a gift. Nicole looked up curiously and asked, "What is it?" "You'll know in a bit," Eric said with a smile. Nicole pursed her lips and rolled her eyes at Eric. After a leisurely lunch, Eric brought the girl to the study. He took out a folder from the bookcase and handed it to the girl who was sitting on the sofa. Nicole squeezed it and felt it for a moment before opening it. The first thing she took out was a bunch of keys. "These are the keys?" Nicole asked curiously. "An apartment on the Upper East Side of Manhattan," Eric explained. "There's also a check inside. It's for the $8 million that I borrowed from you some time ago." Nicole was so surprised that she poured out everything in the folder. In addition to the check and the apartment's ownership documents, there was also a stack of photos of the interior of the apartment. From the photos, it should be a duplex apartment of more than 200 square meters. The interior was decorated in a simple warm color. "So the rumors recently are true?" the girl said as she flipped through the stack of photos. Eric asked curiously, "Rumors? What rumors?" Nicole said, "A lot of people are saying that you made a lot of money during the oil crisis." "I did make some money," Eric said vaguely. Nicole waved the photos in her hand, raised her eyebrows and smiled. "It's definitely more than some. A duplex apartment on the Upper East Side is not much cheaper than a Beverly Hills mansion." "Do the others have one too?" Eric said. "At the time, I just wanted to raise as much money as possible, so I borrowed from you guys. I didn't expect someone to suddenly be so generous, so I treated it as an investment. This apartment was earned with your capital. Only you and Vicky have it. Speaking of which, I'm really pitiful. Among the women, only you and Vicky can give me money." "From this, I can see how unpopular you are," Nicole teased. She quickly asked, "Julia Roberts should be the richest one, right? She got paid $8 million for sleeping with the enemy." Eric shrugged and said, "When I went to her place, I happened to run into Liz. When they heard me say that I wanted to borrow money, they thought I was joking and kicked me out." Nicole stared blankly for a moment before bursting into laughter. Eric also showed a helpless expression. Although Julia later found out that he wasn't joking, at that time, he had already received a large sum of money from the Big Seven. The girl's few million was dispensable, so he didn't ask for it anymore. "Since I earned it with my own money, I'll accept it," Nicole said as she quickly put the things on the coffee table back into the folder. Eric watched Nicole put away the items before asking, "By the way, why are you looking for me today?" Nicole, who had just put away the pile of stuff, became bitter again. "It's so hard to see you now." "All right, let's get down to business," Eric said hurriedly. He couldn't stand the woman's resentful look. Nicole thought for a moment and said, "Do you know Spielberg's latest movie?" Eric thought for a moment and asked, "The one that changed from Peter Pan's Captain Hawk?" Nicole nodded. "I've already participated in the audition for the role of Tinker Bell, but there are a lot of competitors. Can you help me out? I want this role. This shouldn't be difficult for you, right?" Eric recalled the news about Captain Hawk that he had read in the newspapers recently. This movie was an idea that Spielberg had had since he was a child, and he had been writing the script repeatedly over the years. It was only recently that the project was officially approved by the newly established Sony Pictures. It could be said that it was another ambitious project of the rich Japanese. The investment agencies were also optimistic about the prospects of this movie project. A very professional film magazine even analyzed that this movie could make at least $200 million in profit. However, Eric knew that the movie's final results were not as good as expected. The production and publicity cost exceeded $100 million, and the box office in North America was only a little more than $100 million. It was only through overseas distribution that the movie barely broke even. Moreover, the movie's reputation was a mess. Critics criticized the movie for being a ridiculous fantasy, made with expensive special effects. Nicole, although Sony invested in this movie, the person in charge is Spielberg. I don't have any friendship with him. Previously, he wanted to get the adaptation rights for Jurassic Park, but I rejected him, Eric said. Suddenly, he noticed that the woman's expression changed from disappointment to resentment, and from resentment to grievance. So you don't want to help me. Actually, this movie is also. Nicole immediately interrupted Eric and raised her voice. You just don't want to help me. Eric tried to explain. Listen to me, this movie won't do anything to. Enough. Nicole looked at Eric with grievance. Her eyes were filled with tears. Why? Why are you always so mean to me? What did I do wrong? Why are you so nice to those women? You had just made a comedy movie for that woman, and many people know about it now. And Julia Roberts. How am I not as good as her? You've prepared 3 movies for her at the box office. Do you know what it means to film 3 movies at the box office in a row? In Hollywood, no one could compare to her. There was also Drew Ha, a 15-year-old producer. As for me, I've always listened to you. You asked me to change my manager, and I changed it very quickly. You needed money, and I lent it to you with my overdrawn credit card. Do you know that they all have their own houses now? A few of them were bought by you, but I'm still living in a rented villa. Tell me, what did I do wrong? I just asked you to help me say a few words, and you had to make all sorts of excuses. As the girl spoke, she hugged her knees and curled up in the single-seater sofa, sobbing. This situation was a bit sudden, and Eric was also at a loss. He did not expect Nicole to have accumulated so much resentment towards him. Okay, Nicole, don't cry. I will make the call now, and I will definitely get this role for you. Eric walked over to Nicole, squatted down and patted the girl's arm. Nicole shook off Eric's hand, buried her head in her arms, and continued to sob like a little girl. I don't want it, I don't want it. You bastard, you are a big bastard. Okay, I apologize. I was a bit too much in the past, and I always ignored your feelings. Eric pulled Nicole's hand over and comforted her. Actually, I thought that you were so smart and capable, and would not always make me worry like them. You are lying. You are biased. Nicole still did not look up and reprimanded him. Okay, I won't lie. I was wrong. Eric quickly apologized. I don't want you to pity me, you bastard. Yes, I am a bastard. After a while, Eric finally calmed the girl down, and he made the calls one by one in front of Nicole. Although Captain Hawk would not bring any benefits to the girl's career, it would not bring any harm either. After all, this was a movie with worldwide influence, and even if it failed in the end, the blame could not be pushed to the female lead. This movie had influence in many places, and in the end, it was barely able to get through all channels because of Spielberg's fame. Since Nicole wanted the role, he would fight for it. After making a few calls, Eric put down the phone. I contacted Spielberg. He happens to be in Los Angeles. I will invite him to the Point Manor tomorrow afternoon. Nicole had already recovered from her loss of composure. She was holding a few tissues in her hands, and she was cleaning the makeup on her face. When she heard Eric's words, Nicole just pouted and continued to curl up in the sofa. Now let's talk. Eric sat across from Nicole. Nicole's face suddenly showed a panicked expression, like a suspect facing trial. I need to go to the bathroom. Okay. Eric nodded and watched as the girl stood up and ran into the bathroom. After a while, she slowly came out again. Her hair, which was originally tied up, was now loose and draped over her shoulders. Her eyes were slightly red, and she looked more delicate. After the girl sat down across from him, Eric asked straightforwardly, Nicole, you like me, right? I don't. Nicole immediately retorted. Eric did not seem to hear her and said, in the past, I was always unsure about this, but today I am sure. So what? You don't like me. You bastard, you only know how to play with me. It's not that serious, right? Nicole pointed at the desk not far away. It's right there. Did you forget? Ahem, it's only once. At first, the three of them did not talk about Captain Hawk. They just commented on lunch and talked about a lot of interesting things that happened in Hollywood. More than half an hour later, when lunch was almost finished, Eric asked tentatively, Steven, the female lead for Captain Hawk hasn't been decided yet, right? Spielberg looked at Nicole with a strange gaze and nodded. Yes, Eric. Then what do you think of Nicole? Eric did not beat around the bush. Anyway, he definitely owed Spielberg a favor today. Judging from Spielberg's attitude, it should be easy to get the role. Miss Kidman's performance was very good. Spielberg had indeed seen Nicole's audition video and said honestly, but Eric, there are some other problems. Among the current candidates, another actress is also very competitive. Eric thought for a moment, and suddenly thought of another girl. Chapter 372. In his memory, the actress who played the little fairy in Captain Hawk was Julia. Now that Julia had starred in 3 consecutive movies that had grossed over 100 million yuan, she was far more competitive than Nicole. Thinking of this, Eric finally realized why Nicole kept mentioning Julia's name from yesterday until now. It must have been because of the strong imbalance in her heart that caused such a commotion yesterday afternoon. In this competition for the role of Little Fairy, Nicole's biggest rival would undoubtedly be Julia. Although Nicole's last movie had just failed, the popularity she had accumulated through Sleepless in Seattle was still there, and she was still in the ranks of A-list superstars. Under such circumstances, if she were to compete with the other female stars in Hollywood for the role of Little Fairy, the chances of Nicole winning were still very high. But with Julia, it was completely different. What did it mean to have 3 consecutive movies with over 100 million box office sales? Just look at Schwarzenegger. Because of 2 consecutive movies with over 100 million box office sales, Schwarzenegger offered a sky-high salary of $15 million for Terminator 2. It could be said that Julia was now the most appealing box office queen in Hollywood. If she was interested in a movie, for the sake of profit, even those independent production companies would be willing to pay a high salary to invite her to act in a movie, let alone the 7 major film companies with deep pockets. In this situation, unless Julia took the initiative to give up, other actresses would not be able to get the role she wanted. Spielberg could tell from Eric's expression that Eric definitely knew who he was referring to. Captain Hawk was a highly anticipated movie project. Every move of the crew would attract intense attention. The news of Julia auditioning for Little Fairy Tinkerbell had long been dug out by the paparazzi. Nicole, who had been sitting silently next to them, secretly looked at Eric's expression. Seeing the man's hesitation, Nicole's hand holding the cutlery slightly tightened. Eric, Sony Pictures has a lot of support for this project. The funding is not a problem at all. Moreover, the producers at Samsung also hope that Miss Robert can act in it. So the problem now is that if Miss Kidman wants to get this role, someone must be able to persuade Miss Robert to give up on her own initiative. In the end, Spielberg's expression was a little ambiguous. Everyone knew that Julia could become a superstar in Hollywood in just 2 years. All of this was inseparable from the support of this young man in front of him. Julia's 3 movies were all from Firefly Pictures, which could be seen from this point. Although Julia's most recent movie, Sleeping with the Enemy, seemed to have nothing to do with Eric, and Robert Shea spared no effort to brag about his contributions, anyone with some intelligence in the industry would not think so. Therefore, the relationship between Eric and Julia was obvious. As for the specific relationship, Spielberg was not very concerned. The reason why he came in person today was actually for another purpose. Therefore, Spielberg quickly made it clear. So, Eric, as long as you can persuade Miss Robert to give up on her role, I can directly give the lead role to Miss Kidman. Eric looked at Nicole and quickly said, I'll talk to Julia. As for this role, I'll leave it to you. Steven, if you need any help in the future, please don't hesitate to ask. Actually, I happen to have something that I need your help with today, Spielberg said to Eric with a smile. Eric was stunned. He had an illusion that he had fallen into a trap. However, he was still very happy to be able to return the favor immediately. How about we talk about it after lunch? Spielberg nodded. No problem. After lunch, the two found a seat in front of the floor-to-ceiling window by the sea. Spielberg opened the satchel that he had been carrying with him since he came here. He took out a bound script and pushed it in front of Eric. Eric, this is the script for Captain Hawk. You can read it first. Eric pressed the script on the coffee table and caressed the cover. Steven, what are you doing? Spielberg leaned back on the sofa and looked at the sea outside the window. He looked a little tired. After a while he said, Eric, the newspapers are saying that I've been interested in the story of Peter Pan since I was a child. I've always wanted to make this story into a movie. This is not wrong. However, I'm now in my 40s. To be honest, I've long lost interest in this story. Before this project was confirmed, I had already rejected it several times. However, the CEO of TriStar Pictures, Mike Medavoy, who was in charge of this project, used to be my agent. He personally begged me to take on this project, so I had no choice but to accept it. You don't have confidence in this script? Eric asked directly. Spielberg did not deny it. He said in a low voice, I feel that if the movie is made according to the script in front of me, this project is likely to be a serious overdraft on my personal reputation. Eric still did not pick up the script in front of him. He asked again, Then what can I do? I've been watching your Home Alone series for the past few days, especially the second one. This sequel combines a lot of adult elements with the movie's child-oriented style perfectly. And this is what I'm very troubled about. So I hope you can help me take a look at this script. I know that with your net worth, a mere screenwriter's fee is definitely not enough. So if you're willing to participate in the script revision, I can communicate with TriStar and let you participate in part of the movie's investment. Spielberg's words were full of sincerity. Eric could not refuse anymore. He picked up the script and read it. Spielberg quietly drank the coffee that Nicole had brought for them. From time to time, he would pay attention to Eric's expression. Although Eric did not show it too obviously, Spielberg still noticed the small details of Eric's occasional frown. The script was very long. If it was all filmed, it would probably take 2.5 hours. In his previous life, Eric had not seen this movie. He had only heard some information about it. Originally, Eric thought that as a Spielberg film, even if the reviews weren't high, it shouldn't be too bad. However, the process of reading the script at this time made Eric extremely conflicted. There were several times when he wanted to give up directly, and at the same time, he advised Spielberg to simply stop filming. However, the project had already started. The two male leads, Robin Williams and Dustin Hoffman, had already signed the contract. A large amount of money had also been invested in the early stages of preparation. Coupled with the fact that most people were very confident in the movie, it was basically impossible to stop filming. It took Eric almost an hour to finish reading the 100-page script. Putting down the script in his hand, Eric said to Spielberg, Steven, you have much more experience in making movies than I do. And you yourself have realized where the problem with this script lies, right? Spielberg nodded. Samsung wants to make this movie an all-ages movie, just like Alien E.T. But this script, how do I put it? According to my understanding, if this movie is made, it will not please both adults and teenagers. Spielberg smiled bitterly. That is indeed the case. Let's talk about Alien E.T. The reason why this movie became a very successful all-ages movie is that there is something in the movie that everyone is interested in. First of all, the theme of aliens is very attractive to adults. Similarly, the friendship between E.T. and the several small protagonists is also very attractive to teenagers. Therefore, this movie has become a huge box office success. As his proudest work so far, Spielberg listened to Eric's analysis with a smile on his face and nodded from time to time. He was obviously a little proud. However, Eric quickly turned to the script in front of him. But Captain Hawk is obviously not like this. From the perspective of the script, there are too many things that the movie wants to express. If you haven't read the original book, most people can't even understand the relationships between the characters in the movie. Although many people have heard of Peter Pan's name, I dare say that most people's understanding of Peter Pan only stops at the superficial understanding of a child who doesn't want to grow up. As for the stories in the original Peter Pan, such as Hawk and Crocodile, Peter Pan and Hawk, or Peter Pan and Little Fairy, very few people know about them. Spielberg obviously realized something, but he always couldn't grasp the main point. As a very common Westerner with dyslexia, Spielberg really didn't have any talent in writing scripts. So far, none of his most successful movies were written by him. Spielberg could shoot a story into a good movie, but he didn't have the talent to adapt an idea into a good script. So because most people don't know the specific story of the original Peter Pan, we don't have to add so many details from the original book into the script. This will only make the audience confused. Sure enough, I suddenly realized that I had fallen into a misunderstanding, Spielberg suddenly said. Because when I was a child, I heard my mother read the entire original book to me. Subconsciously, I felt that others should also know all the stories in the movie. So when I was writing the script with James, I always wanted to add these details into it. As a result, the story became bloated. Eric smiled and said, "Yes, but this is only one of the problems. The other problem is the positioning of this movie. Even if it's a family movie, there should be a focus. Just like Kids in Charge too. Although there are a lot of adult elements, the main focus is still children. But from the script I've seen, the positioning of the story is very confusing. For children, they obviously won't like the tedious foreshadowing of the first 30 minutes. Children are the most impatient. 30 minutes is enough for them to lose all interest in the movie. And for adults, the plot of Peter Pan and his friends in Neverland is definitely not pleasing. Maybe we should find an element that all the audience is very interested in, and link the two plots together," Spielberg suddenly said excitedly. The two of them looked at each other, and then at Nicole, who did not participate in the discussion, and was sitting quietly not far away, reading a magazine. Little Fairy. Yes, I think Little Fairy is like E.T. in Alien E.T. This is a very likable character. As an elf a few inches tall and a little beauty, this character will be loved by both adults and children at the same time. But in the story, Little Fairy doesn't have enough scenes, and her appearance is a little late. I think she should appear within 10 minutes. Spielberg took the script and looked at it for a while before saying, "This is indeed a good idea. Also, I suddenly feel that we should delete the scene at the back where the fairy grows up and kisses Peter Pan. That's just too bad. There shouldn't be any emotional scenes between them." In order to cater to the adult audience, perhaps we can add a little ambiguity, but there should be more friendship between them. After opening up their minds, the two of them began to discuss enthusiastically. It was not until the sun was setting that Eric sent Spielberg out of the villa. "Eric, I really hope that you can participate in this movie. I can get at least 20% of the investment quota for you from Samsung. I hope you can consider it. I believe that after the changes we discussed this afternoon, this movie will have a lot of potential." Before getting into the car, Spielberg still had not given up on persuading Eric to participate. After an afternoon of discussion, Eric also regained some confidence in the story, but he still had no intention of investing. "Steven, this is your project. I'm just providing some suggestions. Besides, I have my own movie to work on." Although Spielberg knew that Eric was just making excuses, he did not insist. "In that case, that's it. By the way, about the question of who to play Little Fairy, please give me an accurate information as soon as possible, so that I can arrange it for you." "Well, I'll leave first. Goodbye." "I will. Goodbye." Eric waved and watched Spielberg's car drive away. "Eric, this should be a good opportunity. Why don't you want to participate in the investment?" After Spielberg left, Nicole could not help but ask. Although the script has undergone some changes, the story itself has flaws. The profit margin is not big. Eric shook his head and said, "Also, Spielberg and the two male leads did not take any salary this time. They directly participate in the final profit share of the movie. Do you know how much they will get?" Nicole looked at Eric and made a sound of confusion. Eric stretched out 4 fingers and said, "The 3 of them will take the final 40% of the movie's profits. This is not the kind of profit share that is given to non-Hollywood investors. This is the total profit of the movie. In this way, the producers will not make much money. In the end, Sony will only earn a reputation. Rather than participate in the investment, it is better to use this money to make another movie. Nicole had also read about the estimated profits of Captain Hawk. It was said that this movie would make $200 million in the future. 40% of the profits would be $80 million US. Eric, if I get this role, how much do you think Sony Pictures will pay me? I did Spielberg a big favor today. I also rejected his proposal to invest. So don't worry. He will definitely get you a good contract. He had already hinted to me before he left. Nicole quickly remembered Spielberg's words of, "I will arrange it for you." Obviously, he was referring to the matter regarding the role of Little Fairy. Nicole was a little excited at first, but soon she asked worriedly, "Then about Julia Roberts?" Eric patted the girl's back and comforted her. "I will call Julia tonight." You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.